Hey everyone, I'm AfterMOON Horrors. Before we dive into the story, I want to know, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? It's always fascinating to see listeners tuning in from different places. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. Story number 1. It started when I came in early that night. The security lights in the corridor were still flickering, and the factory felt emptier than usual. No echo of footsteps, no chatter from the shift I was supposed to relieve. I remember thinking maybe they'd wrapped up early. Production had slowed lately. I'm not easily spooked, but there's something about walking through a quiet factory that makes your mind pull tricks on you. The hum of old machines, the smell of oil and steel, the weight of space meant for hundreds now holding only you. When I reached the supervisor's office, the red power light on the main conveyor control was blinking. That wasn't possible. All machines had been powered down at 11 p.m., according to schedule. I glanced at the monitors. The assembly line on camera 3 was moving, slowly but definitely moving. At first, I thought maybe the night maintenance team had stayed behind. Though I hadn't seen their cars outside, I grabbed my coat and walked down the long corridor toward the production floor. My shoes echoed against the concrete, each step growing louder as the sound of the machines built beneath it, rhythmic, steady, wrong. The conveyor was running at half speed, but there were no workers. The mechanical arms were moving in perfect sequence, placing empty boxes onto the line as if following invisible hands. I stood there, frozen, watching an entire system function without a single person. Then one of the robotic presses slammed shut, a violent, final sound that snapped me back. I turned to shut everything down, pressing the emergency stop on the control panel, and the noise died instantly. Silence fell, thick and absolute. I waited for a moment, staring at the dead machines, and whispered to myself, "That's not possible." Back in the office, I replayed the footage. The timestamp showed the conveyors starting exactly at 11:42 p.m., 12 minutes before I arrived. But what caught me was the reflection in the glass wall of the supervisor booth. I saw myself, or someone wearing my uniform, walking calmly along the line. I pressed buttons, adjusted dials, and then disappeared from the frame. I froze the footage and leaned closer. It wasn't a perfect match. Her hair was tied higher, and her shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. I checked the door logs. No one had swiped in besides me since 9 p.m. My heart started hammering. I remember the sensation, like all the blood in my body moved somewhere it didn't belong. I didn't tell security right away. How could I? "Excuse me, the cameras are showing another me running production." They'd think I'd lost it. Around 2 a.m., the machine started again. The same whirring hum that rolled like a heartbeat through the concrete. I stared at the monitors. The same movement. The same slow, deliberate operation. I zoomed in on camera 3, and there she was again, me, moving along the line with the same calm, rhythm, hands behind her back, inspecting the process. I noticed this time she never looked up, never blinked. I whispered, "Who are you?" to the screen. My voice shook. The radio on the desk crackled, breaking the silence. "Lucy, you okay down there?" It was Pavel, one of the guards. I hesitated. "Yeah, just some systems glitching. Did you see anyone enter the floor?" He replied, "No one. I just did my rounds." I asked him to check the entrance again anyway. I waited. Then the feed on camera 2 flickered static, then a blur of movement. The version of me turned toward the lens and paused. The picture cleared, and she raised her hands slowly, as if she knew I was watching. I jumped back, knocking over my chair. No, no, no. I hit the power on the monitors, and they went black. I sat there, breathing hard, listening to the low hum fade again. The silence was worse this time. I tried to convince myself it was a recording error, maybe a playback glitch, but The factory didn't have any preloaded footage system. It was all live feed storage. I went to the break room, made a coffee, tried to keep my hands from shaking. I told myself to stay until dawn. Just make it through the shift. When Pavel came in at 3 a.m., I felt relief. He was tall, calm, the kind of person whose presence steadies a room. "You look pale," he said. I laughed it off, told him I'd been up too long. I didn't mention the duplicate, just said the systems kept turning themselves on. He frowned. "We had an incident like that once," he said. "Before you joined, 2001, machines started up without input. The old supervisor blamed electrical interference. I asked, did they ever find the cause? He nodded slowly. She quit the next week. I forced a smile, but something about his tone felt rehearsed, like he'd said it before. After he left, I checked the system again. All shut down. The clock read 3:46. I opened the event log. Someone had logged into my profile at 3:17 a.m. from Terminal B downstairs. That's physically impossible. My keycard was still on me. I went down. Every step felt heavier, the sound of my boots echoing too sharply. Terminal B was beside the packing area, a glass-enclosed control booth. The lights were off, but the screen glowed faintly. I approached slowly. My login name flashed on the display. I reached out, touched the mouse, and the screen flicked to Security Cam Feed 03. My double stood in the aisle again. But this time, the camera's timestamp matched my watch exactly. She was there now. I turned toward the floor, staring into the dark expanse between the machines. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, just beyond the first conveyor, I saw a figure walking. My shape, my stride, my uniform. I whispered, "Hey," but my voice came out small, useless. She didn't turn. She disappeared behind a column, and when I stepped closer, she was gone. Every machine around me was still. The air felt charged like before a storm. I locked myself in the booth and stayed there until dawn. When the morning crew arrived, I played the footage for the plant manager, Petter. He looked at it in silence, his jaw tightening. Finally, he said, "This is old data." I pointed to the timestamp. "Look at the date. That's last night." He sighed. "Lucy, that's not possible. The cameras on that line aren't live anymore. That section was deactivated last month." I stared at him. "What do you mean? I was just there." He shook his head. "The machines are unplugged, powered off for inspection." I demanded to see for myself. We walked together, and I swear my body felt disconnected, like walking through water. When we reached the line, he was right. Everything was cold, coated in dust. No sound, no power. He looked at me with something between pity and fear. "You should take a few days off," he said quietly. But I couldn't. That night, I came back. I don't know why. Curiosity or obsession, maybe both. I told no one. I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. I brought a portable camera and recorded everything: the entrance, the hall, the control booth. The time was 11:37 p.m. when I entered. At exactly 11:42, the sound began again. That same deep, steady hum, rising from the floor like a heartbeat. I held the camera toward the production line, and the conveyor started moving. Slowly, deliberately. The air smelled like burnt plastic and oil, though I hadn't turned on a single switch. I whispered into the mic, "No power, no one here." Then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around. No one. I turned back and froze. The woman in my uniform was standing near the far end of the line, back turned to me, head slightly tilted. She wasn't transparent or flickering. She was solid, real. I yelled, "Who are you?" My voice cracked through the empty space. She didn't move. I stepped closer, my camera trembling in my hand. "Why? Are you doing this?" Still nothing. The machines around us moved in rhythm, presses rising and falling, belts rolling under invisible weight. Then, suddenly, she turned. Her eyes were mine. Her face calm, almost pitying. She mouthed something I couldn't hear. I shouted again, and she raised her arm, pointing at the booth window above us. I looked up. Someone was standing there, watching. Me. The real me? I don't know. I felt everything in my chest collapse inward. I dropped the camera and ran toward the exit. But as I reached the door, the overhead lights went out, one by one, until I stood in near darkness, the hum still pulsing through the floor. I slammed my shoulder into the door. It didn't move. When I woke up, it was morning. The machines were still. The door was open, sunlight spilling in. My camera lay smashed beside me. I took the SD card and left without signing out. I didn't even change clothes. I went straight to the manager's office, said I quit. He didn't ask why. 2 days later, Pavel called. "You left some things in the locker room," he said. I told him to throw them out. He hesitated. "There's a photo here. Looks like you, but older." I froze. "Older how?" He said. "You're standing by the line, smiling. The timestamp says 1997. I told him to burn it. That night, I watched the footage from my camera on my home computer. Most of it was static, but near the end, there was one clear frame, my double standing in front of the machines, whispering something. I slowed it down. Her lips moved clearly. She said, "You shouldn't have come back." A week later, the factory closed indefinitely due to electrical faults. I heard rumors that equipment turned on by itself, that someone saw me walking the halls again, even though I'd resigned. One of the workers, Tomas, messaged me saying he'd found my ID badge by the control booth. I told him to keep it. I couldn't bear to touch anything from that place again. But last night, I found something on my doorstep, a small metal badge with my name engraved. Factory ID number 07LN, the same one I wore the night it happened. Only this time, the photo on it wasn't me now. It was the other me, hair tied higher, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, calm and smiling. I don't know how it got there. I don't even live in Brno anymore. But when I close my eyes, I still hear that sound, the low, mechanical heartbeat starting at 11:42 p.m., waiting for me to clock in. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. It means the world to us, and you're the reason this channel keeps going. Story number 2. I was halfway through my milk run when I first noticed the note. It was a small, folded slip of paper tucked neatly under the empty bottles on the porch of number 46 Fairley Avenue. "Thank you for the milk," it said, in careful, looping handwriting that looked a bit old-fashioned, like something your grandmother might write on a birthday card. I didn't think much of it at first. Back in 1995, a few customers still left notes, requests for extra bottles, missed deliveries, or little thank yous. But what caught my attention was the fact that there was no account for that address on my delivery route sheet. My supervisor, Mr. Hobbs, had given me that route 2 months earlier when I started working weekends before school. "Mostly quiet streets," he'd said. "Retired folks, early risers, good tippers." I was 16 and proud to have that little delivery bike with the clinking glass bottles strapped on. Every morning before dawn, I pedaled through the Bows, cool Perth suburbs, checking addresses off my clipboard, listening to the rhythmic rattle of milk in its crates. But that morning, the crate for number 46 wasn't on my list. Still, I figured maybe Hobbs forgot to update something. The next day, I stopped again. 2 empty bottles on the porch, same as before. Another note, "Thank you for the milk," nothing else. No name, no signature, just those 5 words. I remember pausing with the bottles in my hands, staring at the house. It looked oddly clean. The white paint was a little faded but fresh enough to look lived in. Curtains drawn, flower pots on the railing, and a doormat that read, "Welcome home." I knocked once, mostly out of habit, no answer. The place was silent. I left the milk, slid the note into my pocket, and rode on. That night, I mentioned it to my mum at dinner. She frowned and asked where the house was. When I told her, she went quiet for a moment. "Fairley Avenue," she repeated softly. "Wasn't that near the old Briggs place?" I asked what she meant, and she said, "Never mind, probably a different one." Then she changed the subject. Over the next week, it became routine. 2 empties out, 2 fresh bottles down, and always the same note, written in the same precise handwriting. "Thank you for the milk." Sometimes it looked freshly inked, like it had been written that morning. Other times, it was faint and smudged, like it had been left out for days. But there was something about the porch that unsettled me. Every time I rode up, I felt this strange stillness, like the air around the house wasn't quite right, too still, too quiet. On the 7th day, I decided to ask Hobbs. "Hey," I said, holding up the note after my shift. "Is number 46 Fairley supposed to be on my route?" He glanced at the address and then flipped through the ledger. "Nope, we stopped service there years ago," he said, scratching his chin. "Family canceled their account in the early 82nds, I think." "Why?" I told him I'd been delivering milk there all week. He gave me a puzzled look. "Son, that house burned down ages ago, nothing left of it. Place has been empty ever since." I laughed, thinking he was pulling my leg. "No, I've been there. There's a house, all right. Someone's living there." He shook his head. "Not possible. That was the Briggs family home. Husband went mad, killed his wife and 2 kids, then set the place on fire. Whole thing made the papers back then. Nobody ever rebuilt." I wanted to argue, but the seriousness in his voice stopped me. When I left, the note felt heavier in my pocket. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing that porch, the doormat, the faint smell of something sweet and old, like burnt sugar. At dawn, I decided to see for myself. I rode to Fairley Avenue before starting my shift, my breath fogging in the early air. When I turned onto the street, everything looked normal. But when I reached number 46, my stomach twisted. The house wasn't there, not the way I'd seen it. The lot was empty, just an overgrown patch of weeds, a rotted fence leaning sideways, and the blackened remains of what might have been a foundation. I stopped, staring, trying to make sense of it. My bike creaked as I put my foot down on the curb. The porch where I'd been leaving milk was gone, but the dirt in front of the lot looked disturbed, like something had been sitting there recently. I spotted 2 faint circular marks in the dirt, side by side, the exact size and shape of milk bottles. My skin prickled. I turned around and left. I didn't even finish the rest of my route that day. Hobbs didn't ask why. Maybe he saw the look on my face. But the story doesn't end there. The following week, I tried to convince myself it was a trick of memory. Maybe I'd stopped at the wrong address. Maybe there was another, number 46. So I brought the old notes I'd kept in my jacket pocket. They were crumpled now, the handwriting fading slightly. I noticed something strange. On one of the older notes, the ink had bled a little, but the words weren't, "Thank you for the milk," anymore. They had shifted, or maybe I was imagining it. Now they seemed to say, "Thank you for coming." I nearly threw it away, but couldn't. Something about it felt wrong, like throwing it out would invite bad luck. A few days later, as I rode home after my route, I passed Fairley Avenue again, something I hadn't done since that morning. This time, the lot wasn't empty. There was a light on the porch. I swear there was. A dim yellow glow, like from an old lamp. I pulled over. Maybe someone was rebuilding the place, I told myself. Maybe Hobbs was wrong. I leaned my bike against the fence and stepped closer. As I approached, I heard the faint sound of glass clinking together, like milk bottles being set down on wood. I froze. There was movement inside, a soft shuffle. I called out, "Hello?" Silence. Then faintly, a child's voice, "Mister?" I turned toward the sound. A small figure stood by the porch rail, couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Pale skin, dark hair, wearing an old-style nightshirt. "Do you have the milk?" he asked. My mouth went dry. I nodded instinctively, even though I had no bottles with me. "It's late," I managed to say. "Where are your parents?" He tilted his head, confused. "They're waiting. Inside." Then he pointed toward the door. "You forgot the milk." I backed away slowly. "I'll bring it tomorrow, all right?" He smiled faintly. "Tomorrow's too late." That was enough. I ran. Jumped on my bike, pedaled as fast as I could until Fairley Avenue disappeared behind me. My heart hammered in my chest so hard I thought I might pass out. The next day, I went to the public records office. I needed to know if Hobbs was telling the truth. The clerk, an older lady, helped me search. She found the address after a few minutes and looked at me strangely. "Yes," she said, "that's the Briggs residence. Fire in 1980. Entire family perished. Husband Robert Briggs was suspected of starting it. They never found all the bodies, only his and one child's." I asked how many children there were. "2," she said. "A boy and a girl." That night, I didn't go near Fairley Avenue, but I couldn't sleep again. The image of that boy's face kept replaying how calm he looked, how certain he was that someone was waiting inside. I kept thinking, what if he was real? What if someone actually lived there again? Maybe squatters, maybe kids playing tricks. I had to see it in daylight. The next afternoon, I rode back. The lot looked the same as before, empty. But on the ground, by where the porch had been, lay 2 glass bottles, full, cold to the touch. I picked one up. The label was old, brittle, from a dairy company that shut down a decade earlier. And inside wasn't milk, it was water, cloudy and faintly gray. There was another note wedged between the bottles. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It read, "We're still thirsty." I left everything there and didn't go back for weeks. My route changed soon after. Hobbs said he'd found me a different area, closer to home, he said, not meeting my eyes, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the child's face, heard the glass clink, felt that awful stillness again. Months passed. The memories dulled, but never really faded. Then one morning, as I loaded the bottles for a new route, I found a folded note sitting on top of the crate. My name was written on it, Tyler, in that same looping, careful handwriting. "You forgot the milk," it said. I quit the job that week. Hobbs didn't argue. He didn't even ask why. I think he already knew. He'd been in that business long enough to see strange things he couldn't explain. Years later, after I'd moved away, I read something in the local news that made my blood run cold. A construction crew had begun clearing the Fairley Avenue lot to build a townhouse. While digging, they discovered an old storm shelter beneath the property. Inside were 3 skeletons, 2 adults and 1 child, along with a crate of empty glass milk bottles. Police said the bottles were arranged neatly, in pairs, beside each body. I sat in my living room staring at that article for a long time. I wanted to tell someone, to explain everything that had happened, but how could I? Who would believe that I'd seen that house standing as solid as any other? That I'd spoken to a boy who hadn't been alive for 15 years? Eventually, I tried to reason it out. Maybe my mind had filled in details that weren't there. Maybe I'd seen a different house and convinced myself it was number 46. People misremember things all the time. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't ignore what came next. 3 nights after reading that article, I woke to the sound of glass clinking in my kitchen. I thought maybe my flatmate was up late. I got out of bed and walked down the hall. The noise stopped. I switched on the light. There, on the counter, were 2 empty milk bottles, clean, upright, side by side. My stomach dropped. I hadn't bought glass bottles in years. And between them sat a folded slip of paper. My hands shook as I opened it. "Thank you for the milk," it read. Same handwriting, same ink. I threw the bottles out the window, burned the note in the sink, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Nothing happened after that, but the silence that followed was worse than any noise. Every creak in the apartment felt like a whisper. Every time I passed a milk truck on the street, I felt my chest tighten. I've never gone back to Perth since then. But sometimes, early in the morning, when the streets are still quiet and the world feels paused, I swear I can hear it again, the faint sound of bottles clinking together somewhere nearby. It's always the same rhythm, 2 down, 2 up, like someone keeping count. And every time, I think of that boy's face on the porch, the one who told me tomorrow would be too late. And I wonder if he was right. Maybe it wasn't just about the milk. Maybe, in some strange way, I delivered something else entirely, something I was never meant to bring back. Story number 3. It started on a Wednesday night, my 4th consecutive graveyard shift at the call center in Cebu IT Park. My eyes were heavy from the usual blur of American voices, customer complaints, and canned greetings. "Thank you for calling Allied Broadband. This is Aisha speaking," on repeat until my own name started to sound like a glitch. The floor was half empty because of the pandemic. Most agents were on remote setup, but I had volunteered to come in for the extra hazard pay. The building felt too big for the number of people inside, and that empty hum of computers and air conditioning gave the place a hollow kind of presence, like it was breathing without anyone inside it. Around 2:15 a.m., I was halfway through a routine refund call when my other monitor blinked. A new call flashed in the queue with the label iInternal Ext 8093. Normally, internal calls came from team leads or IT support, but we hadn't used extensions since switching to cloud routing last year. I ignored it, finished the customer, then switched lines. The call had disconnected itself. No voicemail, no record. I shrugged it off. It wasn't the first time the system glitched. It happened every few weeks after updates. Still, something about seeing 8093 bothered me. I couldn't remember anyone ever having that extension back when we did use them. 10 minutes later, it rang again, same label. This time, it didn't route through the headset but through the desk phone, the one that hadn't been functional since 2019. The sudden ring startled me so bad I knocked over my mug. It sounded too loud, echoing across the cubicle rows. The few coworkers on my floor looked up. "You good?" asked Jessa, the quality analyst from the next aisle. I nodded and answered. Static filled the line, deep and low, like the sound of heavy wind pressed against a microphone. Then, very faintly, I heard breathing. "Hello?" I said. No answer. Just that slow inhale and exhale. "Who is this?" My voice trembled. Then, I heard something that froze me in place. A whisper, broken and distant, but unmistakable. "Aisha." I hung up so fast the receiver hit the floor. Jessa stood up from her cubicle. "What happened?" she asked, half laughing. "Did a customer curse you out?" I forced a smile. "Nah, wrong line. Just some feedback noise." But my palms were cold. That whisper, it hadn't sounded like a stranger. It sounded like me. After that, I couldn't focus. I opened the internal directory. just to see if any 8,093 existed in our records. Nothing. The highest number was 8,079. I checked archive staff lists. No results. Maybe someone was pranking us, I thought. Maybe IT was testing an old line. But deep down, it didn't feel like that. It felt directed. Around 3:40, the phone rang again. I didn't even wait. I pressed record on my computer before picking up. Hello? Silence. Then that same faint sound of air shifting through the receiver, like someone too close to the mic. I almost hung up, but then came a voice softer this time, barely audible, almost blending into the static. Come home, Aisha. I froze. The line clicked dead before I could speak. My screen glitched, flickering once, then twice. The mouse stopped responding. My reflection on the black screen looked pale and stiff, like it wasn't me but a version lagging half a second behind. I pulled off my headset and turned toward Jessa again. She was scrolling her phone, half asleep. I wanted to tell her what I'd heard, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. Instead, I typed a note on my phone to check call logs later. A few minutes passed. Then I noticed the message light blinking on the desk phone again. Voicemail. We hadn't used that feature in years. Against my better judgment, I played it. Static, then that same whisper clearer now. Aisha, 12B, La Hug. That was my address, my exact apartment number. My whole body went cold. I deleted the message immediately, but it didn't matter. The sound was already branded into my head. I stood up and walked toward the break room. My legs felt unsteady, like I'd been sitting too long, and suddenly remembered how gravity worked. I splashed water on my face, trying to breathe through the panic. I told myself it had to be a cruel prank. Maybe someone from IT had access to our personal files. Maybe it was a stalker pretending to be clever. But even as I thought that, I couldn't explain the voice. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. I decided to report it to the shift supervisor. But when I went to the supervisor's office, it was empty. The desk light was on, the chair still rolling slightly as if someone had just left, but no one was inside. I went back to my station, and everything on my computer had reset. The screen showed the login prompt as if I'd been logged out hours ago. My heart pounded. Then the building shook. Not hard at first, just a small rumble like heavy construction nearby. The monitors rattled. Jessa looked up, confused. "Is that an earthquake?" she said. I nodded, unable to speak. The shaking grew stronger, then violent. Ceiling dust rained down. Someone shouted, "Under the desk!" We crouched, holding the metal frames. The emergency lights flickered red. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text alert from Pivox, confirming a 6.5 magnitude quake offshore. The floor felt like it was rolling. Somewhere, glass shattered. The power went out completely. In the dim emergency glow, I could still hear the faint ring of the desk phone over and over, cutting through the chaos like it didn't belong in the same world. The building groaned, but the ringing didn't stop. When the tremors finally slowed, we stayed still, breathing hard. My hands shook so badly I couldn't unmute my headset. The silence afterward felt heavier than the quake itself. The phone light blinked again, one missed call. Internal Ext 8093. I didn't touch it this time. Security started evacuating us down the emergency stairs. Dust hung in the air, and the concrete smelled sharp, like burnt metal. On the 5th floor landing, a security guard's radio kept repeating, "6th floor collapse. Repeat, partial collapse 6th floor." That was my floor. I stopped, gripping the rail. Jessa squeezed my arm. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, but didn't tell her that we had been on the 6th floor. That floor was gone. Outside, the parking lot was chaos, alarms, shouts, sirens in the distance. I kept staring up at the windows of our building. The sixth floor was dark, except for one flickering light in the far left corner, my section. The glow pulsed like a heartbeat. Then, just for a moment, I saw a silhouette move past the glass. A woman, same height, same ponytail, headset still on. I didn't tell anyone. Not then. I went home that morning in silence, holding my phone so tightly my hand cramped. When I reached my apartment, the first thing I did was unplug every electronic device. I even removed the battery from my old landline. I told myself to sleep, but sleep didn't come. Around 9 a.m., I got a call from HR asking if I was okay and confirming I'd been marked present. I said yes. Then she hesitated and said something that made my stomach twist. "Aisha, you were marked as logged in twice last night. 2 active users under your credentials, same IP." I didn't know what to say. I told her it must have been an error and hung up. But the thought wouldn't leave me. If my login had duplicated, who was the other one? For days, I tried to shake it off. The quake damage made the building off limits, so we worked from home. But my work software still glitched. Phantom calls would appear in my queue, labeled 8093. When I answered, silence, then breathing. I stopped taking them, but even without picking up, I could hear faint clicks from my headset whenever. The line was active, like someone listening. After a week, I went to retrieve my things from the office. The 6th floor was cordoned off. Half the ceiling collapsed. My cubicle was buried in dust and glass. As I picked through the debris, I noticed something sticking out from under my chair, my desk phone. The receiver was cracked but still attached, and the voicemail light blinked weakly. Against every instinct, I pressed play. The voice that came through was calm, composed, not whispering this time. It said, "This isn't over. You left me here." Then, the recording repeated the same phrase but slower, dragging the words like they were underwater. I dropped the phone and stumbled back. I reported it to building security, but they found nothing on the device when they checked later. No saved voicemail, no battery power, nothing. They probably thought I imagined it. Maybe I wanted to believe I had. Months passed. The company moved locations. I transferred to remote work. Permanently. My therapist called it post-traumatic stress, said I was projecting fear onto technical glitches. She might be right. I tried to live normally again. I bought a new phone, changed my number, and avoided anything resembling a call center setup. But the night before the anniversary of that earthquake, I woke to my phone ringing at 2:15 a.m. The screen said internal ext 8093. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned the phone face down, hands trembling. It kept ringing 12 times, then silence. I stared at it for a full minute before picking it up. No missed call logged, no number in history, just a single new voicemail notification. I played it. Static. Then that same soft, familiar voice, "Come home, Aisha." I felt my throat close up. My apartment suddenly felt smaller, like the walls had moved closer while I was listening. I checked my reflection in the mirror above the sink, pale, sleepless eyes, but something felt wrong. The delay again, that half-second lag between my blink and its blink. I turned the mirror to face the wall and sat down, trying to steady my breathing. For weeks after that, the calls stopped. I began to think maybe it had ended, maybe it was just trauma replaying itself through my imagination. But one evening, while organizing old files, I found a backup folder from the company server. It contained all the recorded calls I'd handled that night except one. The last file was named 8093, recording WF. I listened. Static again, but underneath it, a voice mine reciting the same script I used with customers. Then I heard the faint rumble of an earthquake, the sound of people shouting, chaos. In the background, my voice kept repeating, "Thank you for calling Allied Broadband. This is Aisha speaking," over and over, even as the building fell apart. That's when I realized what had been haunting me wasn't a ghost or glitch. It was a recording, a fragment of me, trapped in that moment, looping endlessly, trying to reach out. I'd answered my own call. I don't talk about it anymore. I still work nights, but never in call centers, never with phones. I keep my devices on silent and unplug them before midnight. Sometimes, when the city goes quiet and all I can hear is the hum of my refrigerator, I catch a faint click from somewhere behind me, like a headset connecting to a line. I try to ignore it, but every now and then, I dream that I'm back on that floor, the monitors flickering, the phone ringing again. Only this time, when I answer, I'm not the one saying hello. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Story number 4. I was halfway through fixing the oil lamp when the radio crackled again. At first, I thought it was just static from the storm that had been thrashing the coast all week. But then the pattern came short, long. I froze. That was Morse code. I hadn't heard it in years, not since Callum used to send me those cheeky midnight messages when he was still alive. My hands started to tremble as I adjusted the frequency knob, thinking maybe I was just imagining it. But there it was again, clearer this time, 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots SOS. I wrote it down without thinking, then leaned closer, whispering into the transmitter, "Identify yourself." Nothing came back except the faint hiss of air over the sea. The thing is, Callum died 8 years ago, capsized on a run to Bressay Point. I was the one who found what was left of the boat. And yet, I swear on my life, that voice that followed the Morse sounded like his. It wasn't words, just the faint crackle of breath through the line. I told myself it was the wind catching the frequency. Happens sometimes when the weather's bad, but the timing, the exact pattern, the tone, it was too deliberate. I switched off the set and went to make tea, trying to shake the tightness building in my chest. But the moment the kettle started to whistle, the transmitter clicked on again by itself, and the lamp beside me flickered like someone had walked past it. I remember saying aloud, "All right, enough of that," like a man scolding an invisible prankster. But there was nobody here except me. There hadn't been for months. After the supply boat went missing 2 weeks ago, the Coast Guard suspended runs until the sea settled. That left me alone, keeping the light going. It wasn't unusual. Isolation was part of the job. But that night, the silence between the wind gusts felt like it was waiting for something. I sat down at the desk, staring at the radio, listening to the lighthouse creak and groan like it was breathing with me. At around 2 in the morning, the Morse started again, this time slower. I jotted each symbol on the page automatically. When I translated it, it said, "Come down." I blinked at it for a full minute, my stomach knotting. The radio was an old Marconi unit, running on backup batteries. It wasn't connected to anything, but the internal system, the signal mast, had been cut off since the early 70s. There was no way anyone outside could send messages through it. I stood up and checked the cable anyway, tracing it to the wall. The connector wasn't even plugged in. That was when I heard the footsteps on the iron stairs. Not from above, from below. The storage deck under the main chamber was off limits, flooded years ago when the sea broke through one of the outer walls. I kept the hatch bolted. I always did. But the sound was unmistakable, the wet scrape of boots on metal. I grabbed the wrench I'd left by the table and went to the hatch. The bolt was still in place, the metal cold under my fingers. I whispered, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. Only the sound of waves and my own heartbeat filled the air. Then, faint and deliberate, came the tap tap tap, the same rhythm as before. Morse. On the damned hatch itself, it spelled, come down. I stumbled back, the wrench clattering onto the floor. My first thought was that I'd finally cracked from the solitude. Months of endless waves, no human voice but the echo of my own. But then something banged once from underneath, hard enough to rattle the lantern glass. I didn't even think. I unbolted the hatch and yanked it open. My flashlight beam cut through the stale air below. The space was half flooded, seawater lapping at rusted barrels and forgotten tools. Nothing moved. I stepped onto the ladder, the metal slick beneath my boots. I must have descended halfway when I saw the reflection, a face in the black water. Not mine. Callum? I whispered. The reflection didn't answer. It just stared, mouth slightly open, eyes cloudy like something submerged for too long. Then the water rippled, and the face vanished. I nearly fell, climbing back up. When I reached the main deck, I slammed the hatch shut and threw the bolt across, gasping for air. I didn't sleep after that. I sat by the radio until dawn, watching the light cut across the waves. Nothing else happened. When the morning came, I convinced myself it was exhaustion, hallucination. That's what solitude does, tricks your mind into filling the silence. 3 nights later, the Coast Guard finally radioed through. The missing supply boat had been found adrift near Fair Isle. No crew. Just the radio log still intact, filled with frantic messages sent to my lighthouse frequency. The last entry was a single line. "He's here." I asked who wrote it. The officer said the handwriting matched Callum's old service record. My stomach dropped. I told him that was impossible. Callum's been dead 8 years. He went quiet for a moment, then said something that made my blood freeze. "Peter, that logbook's from your lighthouse. It was signed out last month. Did you give it to anyone?" I hadn't. The book had gone missing a week earlier, but I assumed it was misplaced in the cluttered desk drawers. The officer said they'd send another boat in 2 days if the weather held. I didn't wait that long. That night, I stayed awake, the radio off, the hatch bolted, every lamp burning. But at exactly midnight, the lighthouse light rotated once and stopped, dead still. The machinery was jammed. I went up to the lantern room to check it, muttering curses the whole way. The rotation gear was fine, but the power switch had been pulled out of the socket. The cord was still swinging. Someone had just done it. When I turned to go back down, I saw wet footprints on the steps leading upward toward me. My throat tightened. "Who's there?" I shouted, but only the echo came back. The prints stopped halfway up, disappearing as though the person had evaporated mid-step. I backed away until my shoulder hit the railing, gripping it so tightly my fingers hurt. Then the radio downstairs came alive again, bursting with static so loud I could hear it through the steel floor. I ran down, half stumbling, grabbed the receiver, and yelled, "Stop it!" The static faded, and through it came the faint rhythm again, dot, dash, dot. My hand shook as I scribbled it down. The message read, "Below you." I dropped the pencil. The metal beneath my boots gave a low creak, like weight shifting from underneath. I crouched, pressed my ear to the floor. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate knock echoing up the ladder shaft. That was the moment fear turned to something else. Defiance, maybe. I'd spent 20 years in this tower, weathered storms that tore boats apart, and I wasn't about to be driven mad by ghosts of memory. I unbolted the hatch again and climbed down with my flashlight. The water level had risen since last time, halfway up the barrels. The beam of light shook as I swept it across the chamber. There was something glinting near the far wall, a metal box, half submerged. I waded through, water freezing around my knees, and picked it up. It was a signal transmitter, the old kind we used before the main system was installed. But this one was still powered. The light flickered red, weak but steady. Someone had reconnected it. I twisted the panel open, expecting to find corrosion or dead circuits, but inside, every component was spotless, new, freshly wired. My breath caught when I saw the signature scratched into the casing. C. McLeod, Callum's initials. I backed up too fast and hit one of the barrels. The clang echoed around the chamber. That's when something surfaced from the water beside me, a shape, slow and silent, rising like a body untangling itself from the dark. I swung the flashlight, the beam catching a face I'll never forget, pale, swollen, eyes wide open. Callum, but it wasn't a hallucination. His body floated upright, hands outstretched toward me, fingers white as bone. I stumbled back, fell hard against the ladder, and scrambled up, the flashlight slipping from my grip and vanishing below. When I slammed the hatch, the metal rang so loud it made my ears ring. I bolted it twice, then sat there for what felt like hours, shaking uncontrollably. The next morning, I didn't even try to call the Coast Guard. I just waited. When they finally arrived, I met them at the dock, pale and sleepless. I told them about the transmitter, the signals, the body. They went down into the lower deck while I stayed above, staring out at the water. After a while, one of them came back up. He looked at me strangely and said, "There's nothing down there, Peter. The chamber's dry. There's no water, no transmitter, nothing." I laughed, thinking he was joking. But when I went down myself, it was true, completely dry. No barrels, no tools, not even the ladder I'd climbed, just bare concrete. They thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. They took me ashore for observation, kept me in a small room at the harbor office. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. On the 4th, I heard tapping on the window, glass faint, but rhythmic. Morse again. "Come down." I shouted for the guard, but when he came, there was nothing there. No sound, no marks, just the sea wind. They released me after a week, said I was fit to retire early. I never argued. A year later, the lighthouse was fully decommissioned. They replaced it with an automated system. But before it shut down, one of the technicians called me from the site. He sounded uneasy, said they were picking up old Morse signals from the disabled line. "Same frequency you used to man," he said. "Sounds like someone's trying to reach you." I told him to shut it off. Disconnect everything. He said he already had. The transmission was coming from inside the lighthouse's own system, the one powered down years ago. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. The guilt I'd buried came back all at once. Callum hadn't died in an accident. He went out that night because of me. I'd ordered him to make that supply run despite the storm warning. He'd trusted me, his mentor, his friend, and I'd sent him straight into the sea. When they found his body, they never recovered his signal box. Now I think I understand. He wasn't calling for help. He was calling me back. Finishing the shift we both started that night. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still hear it faintly on the wind. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. And every time, I whisper the same words I never got to say before. "I'm sorry, lad. I should have been the one down there." Then I turn off the radio, and I wait for the silence to forgive me. Story number 5. I was halfway through my shift when I first noticed it, that faint vibration beneath the floor panels, the kind that doesn't belong to any scheduled train. At first, I thought it was just me imagining things. I'd been working nights at the Lodz railway control booth for almost 2 years by then, and fatigue can make your senses lie. But when the sound rolled in again, the slow, metallic hum of a freight train, I checked the monitor, and there it was. A line of lights, moving across track 4. The problem was, there wasn't supposed to be anything on track 4 until morning. I leaned closer to the screen, my hand already reaching for the clipboard that held the schedule. Nothing. No late-night freight, no rerouted cargo, just silence on the paper and movement on the rails. I radioed dispatch. Control to yard. Are we moving a freight through Lodz Junction? Static. Then a sleepy male voice replied, negative. All freights cleared for morning. Departure. I didn't answer right away because I could still see it, a slow, heavy line of cars illuminated by the platform lights as it passed. The sound was so distinct it made my teeth buzz. I thought, maybe it's a maintenance run, maybe someone forgot to log it, but when I looked closer at the monitor, I saw the taillight vanish behind the curve, and the sensors didn't register it at all. I got up, grabbed my jacket, and went down to the observation platform. The air smelled of diesel and cold steel. The tracks shimmered faintly under the overhead lamps, still trembling as if something massive had just passed. But there was nothing in sight. I walked the length of the platform, scanning the rails. No oil drops, no fresh wheel marks, no sound of retreating engines. It felt like the earth had exhaled and gone quiet again. When I returned to the booth, I logged the event in my notes, even though I knew it'd sound ridiculous. Unscheduled train, track 4, approximately 2:15. No sensor record. The next night, I came early. I told myself I wouldn't let my imagination play tricks on me. Around 2:10, the vibrations started again. My stomach dropped. I stared at the monitors, same track, same direction, same timing. Only this time, I turned on the exterior floodlight camera. The train was there. I swear it was real. Dozens of freight cars, matte gray with faded markings. It moved without a sound except for the low grind of steel on steel, like the noise was happening far away. I paused the feed and zoomed in on one of the cars. The numbers were half rusted, but below them, stenciled in white, were letters that looked like names. Not company logos, actual names. Nowak, Zielinski, Kroll. My brain scrambled to rationalize it. I thought maybe it was some experimental convoy, coded identifiers for shipments. But then I saw one name that made my throat tighten, Marta Nowak. I hadn't said that name out loud in years. Marta had been my best friend. In secondary school. She disappeared when we were 17. Police said she likely ran away, maybe trafficked. Her parents never stopped searching. I hadn't either, not really. Seeing her name on that freight car hit me like a gut punch. I printed the still frame before the train disappeared again, folded the paper into my pocket, and didn't write a single word about it in the shift log. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I searched through National Transport Archives, asked my supervisor discreetly if any unlogged trains were passing through Lodz. He laughed, said, "Katerina, if something's moving through our network unlogged, we'd all be fired." I wanted to believe him, but every night at 2:15, the same vibration came. Always the same direction, always on track 4, and always invisible to the system. One night, I decided to do something reckless. I walked down to the rails just before 2, flashlight in hand, recorder running on my phone. I wanted proof. When the rumble began, I stood near the signal post, watching the curve where the train should appear. I heard the air shift, that low pressurized whoosh that happens right before a massive engine passes, but no lights, no shadow. Then, suddenly, the gust hit me, hard enough to make my jacket whip around. Dust rose, gravel shifted under my boots, my flashlight flickered and died. I shouted into the dark, "Who's there?" Nothing, only the sound of something immense rolling past in silence. When I played back the recording later, my blood froze. You could hear the rails vibrating, the faint rhythm of wheels, but layered beneath it was something else. Voices. Faint, rhythmic, like people whispering names. One name repeated clearly, Marta. I deleted the file. I couldn't listen to it again. That week, I visited Marta's parents for the first time in years. Her mother's hair had gone completely white. Her father still kept the old missing posters on the wall. When I asked about anything related to trains, like if Marta had ever mentioned working near one, her mother said quietly, "Her body was never found, but someone left her jacket near the freight yard." Police said she must have met someone there. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. What could I possibly say? That their daughter's name was painted on a phantom train running through the night? The following night, I tried to avoid looking at the monitors altogether. But at 2:13, the sensors glitched, lights flickering across every track on the grid. All cameras went dark for 5 seconds, and when they came back, the freight train was already there, passing smoothly, ignoring all signals. This time, I caught a clearer glimpse of one car's interior as the floodlight beam caught the window slit. It wasn't empty. There were silhouettes unmoving, upright, shoulder to shoulder. My breath caught in my throat. They looked human. I screamed and backed away from the monitor, so hard that my chair hit the wall. I reported a visual malfunction to dispatch and left my shift early. My supervisor called me the next morning, irritated. "Katerina, you left your post. That could cost you your job." I said I'd been sick. He sighed, told me to take 2 nights off. I didn't argue. During those 2 nights, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the outlines in those freight cars, dozens of still figures swaying slightly as if breathing in unison. By the 3rd day, I knew I had to go back. Not for work for answers. I convinced a yard worker named Tomas, who sometimes had beer with me after shifts, to help. "You'll see, there's nothing there," he said, half amused, half uneasy. We planned to hide near the junction at 2, outside official grounds. The night was silent, except for the creak of metal cooling under frost. When the ground began to hum, Thomas's grin faded. The rails shimmered faintly. "It's just a cargo test," he whispered. Then we both saw it. The train emerged from the curve gray, slow, impossibly heavy, yet soundless. The air felt thick, like underwater pressure. We crouched low. The locomotive had no driver's cabin light, no markings, nothing but those white stenciled names running along each car. I counted 22 before the last one passed. Then it was gone. No smell, no heat, no echo, just silence. Tomas stood frozen. "Did you record that?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just stared at the rails. When I followed his gaze, I saw the gravel was dry, undisturbed. The next day, Tomas didn't show up for work. When I called, his wife said he hadn't come home. I went to the police, told them we'd been near the yard, that he'd vanished. The officer sighed, said he probably went drinking and wandered off. But I knew he hadn't. He'd been terrified. That night, I returned alone. I sat inside the booth, my hands shaking. 2, 10, 2, 15. The vibration started, stronger than ever, like the building itself was breathing. I forced myself to open the mic. "Lods control to unidentified freight, state your line." Static. Then, a reply not through the radio, but through the walls. My own voice, distorted, answering back. "Track 4 clear." I dropped the mic. My vision blurred. I wanted to run, but something in me needed to see it one last time. The train passed slower now, almost deliberate. I pressed my face to the glass. Each car bore a fresh layer of names. Some I recognized, including Tomas. I felt tears sting my eyes. I reached for the camera switch, hit record. The feed flickered, and for the first time, the sensors lit up. The system recognized the convoy. A manifest began to print automatically beside me, the old dot matrix printer screaming to life. I watched the page fill line after line with names, birth dates, and what looked like timestamps, all recent, all within days. The last line printed, "Katerina. Sadowska 2:15, my throat locked. I tore the paper out and stumbled outside. The train was already halfway gone. I stood near the edge of the platform, shouting into the cold air, "Stop! Who are you?" The wind shifted, carrying a faint metallic cry like brakes screaming miles away. Then, silence again. I checked my phone. F2, 16. I ran back inside. The printer was still humming, but no new paper fed through. The system froze completely, every monitor blank. When I rebooted, the date and time had reset to 0. I stared at my ID badge in the reflection of the dark screen. For the first time, I noticed the tiny etching beneath my photo numbers I'd never paid attention to. Train 042315. I'd assumed it was an internal code, but now it matched the identifier I'd seen painted on the phantom locomotive's side. I left the control booth before dawn. I didn't sign out. I drove straight to my apartment, shut the blinds, and stayed awake until the sun rose. I thought about calling the authorities again, but I had no proof, no footage, no paper, nothing but my own word. When I checked the folded photo I'd printed days earlier of Marta's name, the ink had faded to blank gray. A week later, the railway authority announced automation upgrades at Lodz Junction. Night staff were being reassigned. My position was terminated. I packed my things quietly. The supervisor said, "It's for the best, too many power outages, too much confusion lately." He handed me my final paycheck and added, "Strange thing. Though the system still shows someone clocked in every night at 2:15. Must be a glitch." I didn't correct him. It's been years since I left, but sometimes when I walk near the old yard, I still feel that vibration beneath the ground. Once, I swear I heard it again, a low rolling hum deep beneath the soil, like an underground echo that never stops. People vanish from this city every year, workers, travelers, the homeless, and I can't help but think their names are still being added, one by one, to those cars. I try not to imagine my own. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that final manifest printing over and over, my name sliding across the paper again and again, always next to the same time, 2:15. And I know, no matter where I go, that train is still running. Story number 6. It started with the hum of old equipment, that low electric murmur that settles into your bones after midnight. I was 17, and it was my first real job, a night security shift at the old Channel 9 building on the edge of Dunedin. The station had shut down 2 years earlier after it went bankrupt, but they still kept the building under contract for insurance reasons. My job was simple: walk the halls twice a night, make sure no one had broken in, and stay awake until 6. The kind of work nobody wanted, but I did because it paid better than the grocery store and, honestly, I thought it sounded cool. Guarding an old TV station, how bad could it be? The place smelled like dust and tape reels. My small office was just beside the main control room, where the walls were covered in monitors, most dark, some faintly glowing with static. There were still stacks of VHS tapes labeled with white stickers. Evening News, the 12th of June, 1989, Children's Hour pilot, storm coverage. Everything looked frozen in time, like everyone just left mid-broadcast. On my first night, I joked to myself that maybe the power still running to those monitors was haunted by reruns. That stopped being funny by week 3. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I first noticed something strange. I'd been half dozing in the office chair, sipping from a can of flat cola, when I heard faint static, the kind that isn't just white noise but carries a rhythm, like breathing through a radio. I checked the control panel, assuming one of the old machines had powered on, but the lights were dead. Then I saw it. One of the screens flickered on by itself. The top right corner monitor, labeled Studio B, Edit Room. That was odd, because Studio B had been locked since before I was hired. I'd been told the door was sealed after the roof leaked. The screen showed what looked like a dim room, maybe just the reflection of a hallway light, but the angle was off. The camera wasn't one I recognized from the floor plans. I leaned closer, squinting. For a moment, I could swear I saw someone sitting at an editing desk. Just a shape, faint, hunched forward. Then the feed cut to static. My first thought was that it was old recorded footage looping back somehow. Maybe power had surged through an ancient circuit. So I grabbed the ring of keys, slung my flashlight, and decided to check. That's when I noticed the air felt colder. Not in the supernatural sense, more like the ventilation had kicked in, but I could hear nothing moving, just the quiet, stale stillness. My footsteps echoed through the main corridor as I passed posters of smiling anchors from the 80 seconds, their eyes catching light from my torch like they were watching me. When I reached Studio B, the padlock was still in place, rusted, untouched. I shook it, solid. Then I tried peering through the wired glass panel, but the inside was pitch black. My flashlight beam barely reached the far wall. Nothing, just coiled cables and stacked editing machines. I was about to turn back when I heard a click, a screen turning on. It came from somewhere deeper inside the room, followed by the faint hum of static again. That impossible sound, behind a locked door. I felt something twist in my gut, that instinctive warning that something doesn't fit in the world as you know it. I stepped back slowly, retraced my steps to the control room, and looked up at the monitor again. The feed was live again, this time clearer. The same editing desk, same angle, but now the chair was empty. The screen on the desk flickered with a faint, glowing outline of static. And that's when I realized something even stranger. The editing room lights were on in the feed, but the power switch on my side was still off. I told myself I was being stupid, that maybe the feed was from some old security backup, but when I leaned in, I could see movement, a figure, blurry, walking across the background. It looked like someone in a uniform, my uniform. I froze. The figure sat down in front of the editing screen, head tilted slightly, like trying to read something closely. I watched, breathing hard, as his hand moved to scratch his temple exactly the way I had done seconds earlier. My reflection in that dark glass wasn't a reflection, it was a delay. I watched me blink a second after I did. The lag was wrong. I don't remember standing up, but I was suddenly at the door. My pulse was hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. I unplugged the entire control console, yanked every cable from the wall. The monitors flickered, then went black. Silence. I stood there in the dark, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself, old broadcast signal, ghost image, nothing real. Then, just as my heartbeat began to steady, I heard the beep. One monitor powered back on by itself. No cables connected, no main breaker on. It glowed pale blue, showing that same editing room. Empty again, except for the flickering screen at the desk. And from the speakers came a faint whisper, so soft I had to step closer. It was my name. Samuel. Just once, like someone testing a microphone. I can't explain why I didn't run. Maybe part of me wanted to prove I wasn't scared. Maybe I wanted to understand it. I grabbed my flashlight again, this time determined to open Studio B, even if I had to break the lock. My hands were shaking as I walked the corridor again. The sound of my boots on tile felt too loud, like the building itself was listening. At the door, I braced the padlock with my boot and hit it with the flashlight handle until it snapped. The door creaked open, the smell of mildew and old electronics flooding out. I stepped inside. It was exactly as I'd seen, editing desks, cables, two old monitors stacked on top of each other. One was still faintly glowing. I crossed the room and brushed dust from the screen. Static. I leaned close. And that's when I noticed the faint reflection of my flashlight beam behind me. But when I turned, There was no one there, just rows of empty tape shelves. Then the screen changed. It wasn't static anymore. It showed the control room, my office, and the monitor bank. Empty, except for the single glowing screen I was now standing in front of. I realized what that meant. There was another camera in this room, one I hadn't seen. It was broadcasting me. I scanned the ceiling and corners, trying to find the lens. When I saw movement on the screen again, a figure entered the control room, tall, wearing my jacket. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but the way he moved, slow, deliberate, almost mechanical, made my stomach twist. He walked up to the same chair I'd been sitting in earlier and sat down. Then he turned toward the monitor, the one I was looking at, and stared straight into the lens. I felt my throat tighten. On the screen, he smiled. Then, in perfect sync with the sound delay, he spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." I stumbled back, tripping over a cable reel. My flashlight rolled across the floor, its beams spinning wildly. The air was thick now, humming like every wire in the room was alive. I lunged for the door, but it slammed shut before I reached it. I pulled at the handle, nothing. Then the monitors began to flicker faster, showing overlapping footage. News anchors laughing, weather forecasts, color bars, static faces all looping. Over and over, a single frame appearing between them, me, sitting at the console, mouth open like I was about to speak. I hit the door again, shouting. The power went out, total darkness. I could hear the whir of a tape reel spinning behind me, fast, unwinding. My hands found the handle again, and this time, it gave. I bolted out, slammed the door, and ran back to the security office. I didn't stop until I reached the main control board. Everything was black. Except for that one damn screen. It still showed Studio B. The door I'd just run from was open on the feed, swinging slowly. Then, from the side of the frame, a hand reached out my hand and turned off the monitor. The feed went dead. I must have sat there for an hour, maybe more, too scared to move. When dawn came and the next guard arrived, I told him there'd been a power fault. I didn't mention the video, but when I came back that night, everything was gone. The monitors had been removed, all the cables coiled neatly on the floor. I asked the site manager about it the next morning, and he looked confused. He said Channel 9 had dismantled the control system years ago before I was even hired. He showed me the maintenance logs. There was no record of a functioning monitor bank, no active circuit boards, no wiring connected to Studio B. I thought he was joking until I went to see it again. The editing room was empty, stripped bare, paint peeling, not even a power outlet left, but I could still see the marks on the floor where the desks had stood. My boot prints were still in the dust, faint but there. I quit that week, told them I couldn't do nights anymore. They didn't ask why. But here's the part that still gets to me 2 years later. When I was working at a print shop, I got a parcel in the mail. No return address. Inside was a VHS tape labeled in faded handwriting, Channel 9, Edit Room, July 1991. My stomach turned. That was the month I'd worked there. I borrowed a player from a friend, told him it was an old home video. When I pressed play, it showed the control room. Grainy footage, time-stamped 2:36 a.m. The camera panned to the door, then zoomed in on the desk. I was sitting there, 17-year-old me, half asleep, sipping flat cola. Then, on the screen, my younger self turned toward the camera, eyes widening, like he'd just noticed something. He stood up, walked toward the editing hallway, and vanished from frame. The tape ended there. I rewound it 3 times, hoping maybe there'd be some clue, a flicker, something that made sense. But the static at the end, it wasn't just noise. It was breathing, slow, steady, in perfect rhythm with mine. And just before it cut to black, I heard a faint voice say, "Good night, Samuel." I don't talk about it often. Every time I do, I get this strange pressure behind my eyes, like I'm remembering something that didn't happen or hasn't yet. But sometimes, when I'm up too late and the TV loses its signal for a second, I still catch that blue tint in the static. And if I look long enough, I swear I can see the faint outline of someone sitting there just like me watching. Story number 7. The call came through just as I was logging a patient's vitals into the system. Dr. Nilsson, urgent consult in Ward C, room 12. I froze with my hand hovering above the keyboard. Ward C? I repeated into the intercom, half laughing. That's not a thing. You must mean Ward B. The voice on the other end was flat, mechanical, almost as if pre-recorded. Ward C, room 12. Patient is unresponsive. Then silence. No static, no sign-off. Just the dead line humming quietly back at me. I remember the exact feeling that crawled through me, like my body understood something my mind refused to. The hospital in Bergen was old, built in layers over the decades. My first week, I'd been told that Ward C had been closed since the 1980 seconds after a series of unfortunate events, which everyone conveniently stopped explaining the moment I asked questions. It was a ghost on the floor plan, still visible on blueprints, but walled off physically. We'd joke about it sometimes. If a pager ever says Ward C, you ignore it, one of the senior nurses once laughed. So, naturally, I didn't ignore it. I told myself it had to be a system glitch. The intercom network was ancient, the kind that still used analog transmitters. I grabbed my ID and flashlight and headed for the eastern corridor. It was quiet, too quiet for a hospital, especially around midnight. Even the usual sound of oxygen pumps and distant wheel squeaks felt dulled, like the building was holding its breath. My shoes clicked down the polished linoleum, echoing far longer than they should have. I passed Ward B, its lights warm and alive with soft conversation, and reached the hallway that supposedly ended at a locked storage area. But it didn't end. That night, there was another door. A gray, metal fire door with a faded C stenciled onto it. My breath caught in my throat. I had walked this same stretch of hall hundreds of times. That door had never existed. I ran my hand along the frame. It was cold, almost icy. For a moment I considered calling security, but curiosity is a cruel thing. I swiped my ID out of habit. The reader beeped green. I wasn't supposed to have clearance, but the lock released with a soft click. Inside, the air smelled different, antiseptic, layered over something sweet and decayed. The corridor was long and narrow, with peeling paint and old signage hanging at odd angles. The lights flickered weakly, half of them dead, casting uneven shadows that stretched across the floor. My flashlight beam trembled slightly in my hand. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding embarrassingly small. "Medical staff, here. I got a call for Ward C, room 12. My words bounced back, distorted by the hallway's strange acoustics. I walked past a nurse's station, covered in dust. A half-finished cup of coffee still sat there, the liquid inside blackened and congealed. The whiteboard behind the desk listed patient names in faded marker, all dated from 1983. My chest tightened. This wasn't just an unused wing, it had been frozen in time. And yet, I could hear something faint, rhythmic, a soft beeping, like a heart monitor. I followed the sound until I reached a room with the number 12 etched into a tarnished brass plate. The door was ajar. I nudged it open with my elbow. Inside, an old hospital bed sat against the far wall, its frame rusting, the sheets yellowed. A figure lay on it, covered up to the chest with a stiff, gray blanket. The monitor beside the bed flickered weakly, displaying a flat line. But the beeping continued steady, mechanical, detached from any logic. I stepped closer, every instinct screaming at me to stop. The man in the bed looked wrong. His skin was stretched thin, his eyes sunken but open, staring at the ceiling. His mouth was slightly parted, as if caught mid-breath. I touched his wrist out of reflex, searching for a pulse. Nothing. Cold as marble. But as soon as my fingers left his skin, the beeping stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. And then, in that silence, I heard whispering. Faint, overlapping voices like a dozen conversations bleeding through static. I turned in a slow circle, shining my flashlight at the walls. The sound seemed to come from everywhere, vents, ceiling tiles, even the floor beneath me. "Who's there?" I demanded, louder now. My throat tightened. No answer, only the whispers folding over one another, growing sharper. Then a single word emerged, clear and deliberate, cutting through the noise. "Stay." My flashlight flickered and went dark. The overhead lights followed, plunging everything into black. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I pulled out my phone, but the screen glowed only for a second before dying too. The only thing I could hear was my own breath and something else, faint but deliberate, like slow footsteps approaching behind me. I turned, but there was nothing. Just the outline of the bed, the patient still lying there. Then his head moved, just slightly, a slow tilt toward me, bones creaking like wood. His lips parted, dry and cracked. "You're late," he rasped. I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe hard enough to send pain shooting down my arm. "You shouldn't be here," I said, but my voice came out shaky, almost pleading. He blinked once, slow, deliberate. "None of us should," I bolted. The hallway stretched longer than before, impossibly long. My footsteps slapped against the tile as the whispers rose into a low wail. The door I'd entered from was gone. Every exit led to another hallway, another corner. I could feel the air thickening, colder, heavier with each breath. My flashlight finally flickered back on for a second, just long enough to catch a glimpse of figures standing inside the rooms I passed. Dozens of them, some watching me through glass, others standing right at the thresholds, motionless. I found a stairwell at last and sprinted down, 2 steps at a time, until I hit the next floor. The metal door slammed behind me, cutting off the noise. I collapsed against the wall, gasping. When I finally looked up, I was in the main wing again. Ward B's lights glowed warm and steady. Nurses passed by with charts and IV poles like nothing had happened. I wanted to cry from relief. I stumbled to the security desk, nearly shouting, "You have to check the eastern corridor, someone's in Ward C." The guard blinked at me, confused. "Ward what?" "Ward C," I repeated. "There's a patient in room 12, there was a man." He cut me off gently. "Doctor, there is no Ward C. That section was sealed off in 1984 after the incident." He said it like he'd said it before, like I wasn't the first. I didn't believe him. I grabbed his monitor and rewound the hallway footage myself. The camera showed me walking toward the corridor, then nothing. The frame froze on the moment I reached the blank wall where the door should have been. I didn't appear again. I played it twice, 3 times. The guard shifted nervously beside me. "Maybe you were in another section," he offered, but his voice cracked slightly. I didn't sleep the next day. I kept replaying it in my head, that door, that room, that voice saying, "You're late." By the next shift, I convinced myself it was stress, a hallucination. I even walked back to the same corridor. The wall was solid now, white plaster from end to end, no seams, no hidden hinges, nothing. I placed my hand against it anyway. It was colder than the rest of the hall. 2 days later, I was called into administration. They said security had flagged suspicious activity from my ID, Apparently, my access log showed entries into restricted areas that don't exist anymore. "You understand this can't be happening, right?" my supervisor said quietly. "Ward C hasn't been on our digital system for 20 years. She handed me the printed log. The timestamp was 017, same minute as the call I'd received, my badge number, my signature. That night, the intercom crackled again. I was in the break room alone, stirring coffee that I wasn't going to drink. "Dr. Nilsson," the voice said softly. "Follow protocol." "Ward C, room 12. The cup fell from my hand. The sound of it shattering barely registered. My heart hammered so loud I could hear it in my ears. I turned off the radio, unplugged the intercom, even removed the batteries from the pager. Still, the voice came through. Patient, unresponsive. I ran to the nurse's station. My colleague Liv looked up from her chart. "You look like hell," she said. "It's the intercom again," I stammered. "You didn't hear it?" She frowned. "Hear what?" I pulled her toward the corridor, my voice breaking. "Come with me, please. Just look." We reached the same wall. Smooth, white, unremarkable. "There's nothing here," she whispered, touching my shoulder gently. "Maybe you need some rest." I nodded weakly, pretending to agree. But when I turned to leave, the faint outline of the door shimmered back into view, just enough for me to see the faded sea. Liv didn't see it. Her eyes met mine with concern, not fear. I didn't try to explain. I couldn't. I knew what would happen if I opened it again. I filed my resignation the next day. I packed up my locker, returned my badge, and walked out into the cold Bergen air. I thought that would be the end of it. But last week, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed hospital paper. Typed neatly at the top, "Dr. Ingrid Nilsson, assigned night duty, Ward C, room 12. The date was the 14th of February 1983. I keep it in a drawer now, though I should have burned it. Sometimes, late at night, my phone vibrates with no caller ID, and I hear that same voice through the static. Calm, professional, patient, unresponsive. And every time, for a second, I almost answer. Because deep down, a part of me still believes I left someone waiting there. Story number 8. You ever have one of those nights that just feels off from the start? That's what it was like for me that Friday in '99. I was 21, working the late shift at a small pizza place called Marco's in Swansea. Nothing fancy, just me, a dented delivery car, and a stack of orders scribbled in grease pencil. Usually, I didn't mind night shifts. The roads were quiet, tips were decent, and you could almost forget how tired you were. But that night, the phone kept ringing, even after we'd stopped taking orders. Around 11:45, the phone buzzed again, and for some reason, I picked it up. The voice on the other end sounded wrong. Flat, distant, like the caller was speaking through layers of static. They ordered a large pepperoni, extra cheese, and asked if we could please deliver quickly before midnight. I asked for the address. There was a pause, and then the person said, 17 Glen Court Road. I jotted it down automatically, but as I said it back, the line went dead. No goodbye, no confirmation, just the dull hum of a disconnected tone. I remember checking the order sheet. The handwriting was mine, but the address didn't ring a bell. I'd been delivering in Swansea for almost 2 years by then. I knew most streets, but Glen Court Road? I couldn't place it. I asked my coworker, Darren, who was wiping down the counter. He squinted at the slip and said, "That's near Forestfach, I think, out by the old estate." He sounded unsure, but I shrugged. It wasn't far, and I wanted the overtime. The pizza came out a few minutes later, steaming hot. I boxed it, taped the lid, and shoved it in the warmer bag. As I reached for my keys, Darren joked, Don't get lost in the ghost town, mate." I laughed it off, though his timing made the air feel heavier. The drive took me about 15 minutes. I turned off the main road and followed my sat-nav, an old unit that barely worked right. It showed Glen Court Road as a thin gray line curving near an old industrial park. But as I drove deeper, the houses grew fewer and older. Boarded windows, street lamps that flickered. It didn't look like anywhere that should still have active addresses. When I finally reached what should have been number 17, I slowed down. There was nothing there. Just a fenced-off lot full of rubble and broken bricks. I parked anyway, double-checking the slip. 17 Glen Court Road, clear as day. I got out, bag in hand, and looked around. Across the road, a cracked sign leaned sideways, covered in grime. The lettering read, "Demolition Site No Entry." The wind picked up, carrying that sharp, metallic smell you get near old construction. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to just go back. But then I saw a faint glow in the distance like a porch light. Just beyond the rubble, up a short incline, was a small terraced house, still standing alone. Its curtains were drawn, and a dim yellow light flickered inside. Against my better judgment, I walked toward it. The ground was uneven, my shoes crunching over bits of concrete and glass. When I reached the gate, it creaked open on its own. I froze, hand halfway to the latch. My chest felt tight, but I forced myself to step through. The path to the front door was lined with overgrown weeds. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Then, from inside, a voice called, "Come in, please." It sounded old, weak, but polite. I hesitated. Delivery drivers never enter homes. That's rule number 1. But something about that voice made it feel rude not to. The door opened with a soft groan. The inside smelled faintly of smoke and something sweet, like burnt sugar. The wallpaper was peeling, furniture covered in white sheets. It looked frozen in time. And sitting in an armchair near the hearth was an elderly woman, wrapped in a thick shawl. "You're quick," she said, smiling faintly. "Just set it there on the table." I placed the pizza down, still too stunned to speak. That'll be £9.80, miss." She nodded, reached into her pocket, and handed me a handful of coins. When I looked closer, they weren't right. They were old, thick, tarnished, and heavy. Shillings. I blinked, confused. "Sorry, miss, these aren't, they're not valid anymore." She looked up slowly, her eyes watery but calm. "They were good once," she said softly. "They still buy what matters." Something about the way she said it sent a chill through me. I glanced around the room again. There were framed photographs on the mantel, black and white, showing a family standing in front of the same house. But in the background of one photo, behind the smiling faces, was a tall chimney and smoke clouds. The same smoke smell lingered faintly in the air now. "Do you live here alone?" I asked, just trying to make sense of it. Her lips curved into a tired smile. "Not always. My boys will be home soon." I nodded, wanting to leave. "All right, well, enjoy your pizza." "Wait," she said gently, and her voice softened even more. "Would you mind taking something for them? They'll be hungry after their shift." She pointed toward the counter, where a small metal lunch tin sat, spotless despite the dust everywhere else. I didn't know what to say. My hands shook as I picked it up. "Sure," I managed, though I didn't know who they were. As I turned toward the door, I noticed something odd. The pizza box was already open on the table, and steam was rising from it, but I hadn't opened it myself. The smell wasn't of pepperoni anymore. It was like something burnt, acrid. My stomach turned. I stepped outside, mumbling a polite goodbye, and shut the door behind me. The night air felt sharp and alive. I walked quickly back to my car, not looking back. When I started the engine, my hands were trembling. The digital clock read 12:04 a.m. Driving back, the road looked different. The streetlights seemed further apart, like the whole area had stretched somehow. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting headlights behind me, but the road was empty. When I reached the main junction, I saw a police car parked near the turnoff. I slowed, rolled down my window, and called out, "Excuse me, is Glen Court Road closed?" The officer frowned. Glen Court Road? That was demolished 10 years ago after the explosion. I stared at him. Explosion? He nodded, leaning on the door. Gas leak. Whole block went up. Killed a dozen people. No houses left there now, just a fenced lot. Why? I didn't answer. I just thanked him and drove back to the shop. By the time I got there, it was nearly 1 a.m. Darren was stacking boxes in the back. I tossed the delivery slip on the counter and said, "Don't ever send me to Glen Court again." He looked up, puzzled. "Where?" "Glen Court Road," I repeated. "The one near Forestfach." He frowned deeper. "Mate, we haven't had that street in our system for years. It's not even on the order map anymore." I held up the slip. My handwriting was still there, but the ink looked faded, smudged like old carbon paper. Darren squinted. "That's not tonight's ticket pad. That's the old one we threw out ages ago." I didn't know how to respond. I reached into my pocket to show him the coins, but when I opened my palm, they were gone. Just a faint, metallic scent remained on my fingers. I left early that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. The drive to my flat felt endless. I kept replaying the woman's voice, soft, steady, and sad. "They'll be hungry after their shift." When I got home, I set the lunch tin she'd given me on the counter. I hadn't opened it yet, mostly because I didn't want to. But after an hour of sitting there, staring at it, curiosity won. The latch snapped open easily. Inside was a neatly folded cloth napkin. Beneath it, something glinted, an old name badge, rusted around the edges. It read, "Thomas Hughes, Boiler Technician." The back of the badge was scorched. My stomach dropped. I remembered the police officer's words, 12 people dead in a gas explosion. I Googled it on my clunky desktop computer. The article came up right away. 12 dead in Glen Court gas explosion, 1,989. The list of victims included Thomas Hughes, 34, father of 2 boys. I sat there, staring at the screen. My flat was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard it, 3 soft knocks at the door. At first, I thought maybe it was my neighbor. I checked the peephole. No one was there, just the empty hallway. I turned the lock anyway. Then, from somewhere beyond the thin apartment wall, I heard it again, 3 knocks, this time on the kitchen window. I froze. The blinds were half drawn, so I could only see a sliver of the outside. Someone was standing there. 2 silhouettes, shoulder to shoulder. They were small, child-sized. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering. The smaller figure moved closer to the glass. Its face came into view for a split second, pale, eyes wide and expectant. Then the voice came, muffled but clear. "Mum says you brought food." Every hair on my body stood on end. I dropped the tin. It hit the floor with a metallic crack. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The window fogged slightly from the condensation of their breath. Then, slowly, both figures stepped back into the darkness. I stayed awake till dawn, lights on, trying to convince myself I imagined it. But the next morning, when I walked out to my car, something stopped me cold. On the passenger seat lay 3 shillings, clean and bright as if newly minted. I didn't tell anyone for years. What could I say? That I took pizza to a ghost house? That someone paid me with money that shouldn't exist? But every time I think about it, I remember that woman's calm smile. She didn't look afraid. She just wanted her boys to eat. I quit Marco's a month later, moved to Cardiff, got a warehouse job. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and the GPS glitches, I swear I see it again, Glencourt Road. Just a faint turn-off on the map, glowing faintly for a few seconds before it disappears. And once, last year, when I was refueling outside of Swansea, I saw a delivery slip on the counter of a closed pizza shop window. Yellowed paper, edges curled. The handwriting looked just like mine. The address read, 17 Glencourt Road. No one was inside, but I swear I could smell burnt sugar. Story number 9. You ever have one of those nights when everything feels just slightly off? Not wrong enough to panic, but just wrong enough that your body knows before your brain does. That was me in the paper mill back in '84. Third shift, 12 to 8. The building was old, the kind that breathed in winter and moaned in the pipes. I'd been cleaning there 6 months, trying to save up after my divorce. It wasn't glamorous, mostly sweeping corridors, scrubbing restrooms, keeping the machines dust-free, but it was steady pay. That night started normal enough. The machines had long gone silent, and the smell of bleach hung heavy in the air. I'd just finished mopping the south corridor when I noticed something that shouldn't have been there. The east wing floors were already gleaming. I remember standing there, mop in hand, blinking like maybe I'd forgotten I'd done them. But no, I hadn't touched that wing yet. I even checked my checklist clipped to my cart. East wing next up. Yet the tiles shone as if someone had just waxed them. I ran my finger along the wall and came back with damp residue. Someone had cleaned it. That was strange, because the night shift was just me. The company couldn't afford 2 janitors, not for the graveyard hours. I went to the break room, thinking maybe one of the day guys had stayed late. But the punch clock showed everyone else out. Just me, Eleanor Hughes, badge number 1472. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe the supervisor had been through earlier and helped out. I kept working, humming to myself like I always did when I got nervous. By 2 a.m., I was done with the North Hall and went to empty the bins near the maintenance bay. That's when I noticed the bucket. An old metal mop bucket sitting by the doorway, half full of gray water. We'd switched to plastic years ago, after one of the guys slipped and cut his leg open. I picked it up. It was cold, like it had been sitting for hours. I looked around for the old kind of mop too, the stringy cotton ones we'd phased out. But all I found was one leaning against the boiler wall. Damp. Used. I laughed out loud then, trying to break the tension. "All right, Joker," I said into the empty room. "Real funny." My voice echoed longer than it should have. I told myself maybe the bucket had just been left behind from before the switch. Maybe one of the supervisors used it earlier. But it was getting harder to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The building had this way of amplifying silence. You could hear your own breath bounce back at you. So, I turned on the radio we kept in the custodial cart, just static and soft rock from a local station. Around 3, I was in the supply closet refilling cleaner bottles when I heard footsteps in the hall. Heavy ones, boots, not the rubber soles I wore. I froze, every nerve in my body tightening. They passed right by the door, slow and deliberate. I stepped out, called, "Hey, that, to you, Tom?" Tom was the day janitor. No answer, just the low hum of the factory's ventilation. The hallway was empty, but on the floor were wet footprints. Large, wide soles, leading from the far end toward the loading bay. The cleaner smell was strong there, too. Someone had been using my wax. I followed the prints until they stopped abruptly in the middle of the floor. Not faded, stopped. Like whoever made them had just disappeared. My heart was hammering. I was trying so hard to stay rational, to explain it away. Maybe they dried fast. Maybe I'd missed a smudge. I even crouched down and touched the last print still damp. That's when the air around me shifted. Not colder exactly, just thicker, like breathing through syrup. The lights flickered once, the radio cut for half a second, and I swear I heard a whisper. Not words, just the sound of someone muttering through clenched teeth. I left the mop where it was and went straight to the supervisor's office. No one there, of course, but the wall clock was ticking louder than I remembered. I looked through the attendance sheets, flipping pages until I found the old ones they hadn't thrown out. Maybe I was looking for proof of something, I don't even know what. Then I saw it, a name scrawled over a faded sheet from 1974, William Bill Carson Custodial. Next to it, badge number 1472. My badge number. My stomach dropped. I stared at it, trying to understand. Maybe they'd reused it. It happened sometimes, especially with layoffs. But under his name was a red stamp, deceased fire incident, the 12th of April, 1974. I remember the sound that came out of me then wasn't really a word, more like air leaving my lungs. The paper mill fire. I'd heard about it from some of the older workers. A boiler explosion, a few casualties, mostly maintenance crew. They'd rebuilt half the wing. I thought it was just another factory tragedy, nothing personal. Until now. I kept staring at that line until I'd been manises. I heard the mop bucket clatter outside the office. The metallic scrape echoed down the corridor. I stepped out slowly, calling again. Tom? Anyone here? The bucket was on its side, the dirty water spilling out in a long, slow stream toward my boots. Only there was no one around. I followed the spill pattern, and it led straight toward the east corridor, the one that had already been cleaned earlier. I didn't want to go there. Every part of me said not to, but I had to see. As I walked down that hallway, the smell of bleach grew so sharp it made my eyes water. The floor gleamed under the fluorescent lights, too bright, almost wet. Halfway down, I saw the reflection of someone behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Turned back. And now the reflection was gone too. That broke something in me. I dropped the mop and ran to the locker room. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial the security office. The phone rang and rang, then cut to static before going dead. I sat there, knees pulled up, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself I'd leave at dawn, just make it through the shift. But then I smelled smoke. Faint, at first. Not burning plastic, but old smoke, the kind that seeps into concrete and never really leaves. I looked up. The air above the vents was hazy. The emergency lights flickered red, just once, then steadied. The fire alarms didn't go off, but I could feel the heat, low and pulsing, like a memory made real. I ran toward the control panel, thinking maybe it was a short circuit. As I passed the east corridor again, the walls shimmered. For a second, just a second, I saw it. Flames. Not real, not fully there, but visible enough to light the tiles in orange. And someone in the middle of it, pushing a mop like nothing was burning at all. I yelled, "Hey, get out!" and ran forward. The heat hit me like a blast from an open oven. I reached the spot, and the flames vanished. The floor was spotless, the air still, but the smell of smoke clung to my clothes. I didn't finish the shift. I grabbed my coat and left, clocking out early for the first time. I didn't even bother locking the storage room. The cold outside felt unreal, like I'd stepped between worlds. I drove home on autopilot, barely remembering the road. I didn't tell anyone, not even my son. Just told the supervisor the next day that I'd seen someone trespassing. He looked at me strangely and said, "You're not the first to say that." Then he leaned back and lowered his voice. Sometimes the cleaners report strange noises. The company doesn't talk about it, but that fire took one of our janitors. Poor bastard didn't make it out. He paused, glanced at my badge, and frowned. Strange, they gave you 1,472. Thought they retired that one. I didn't know what to say. I quit the following week, told them it was the hours, but really, it was that hallway, that smell, the reflection I couldn't forget. Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I went to the city archives to check. The 1,974 fire was smaller than I'd imagined, confined mostly to the east wing. The report said William Carson had gone back inside to rescue someone who'd already escaped. They never found his body, just his uniform and badge. The number 1,472. I tried to put it out of my mind. Life moved on. I got a new job at a cleaner office downtown. Fewer nights, better pay. But sometimes, when I stay late to finish the floors, I get that same feeling. Like someone's already done the work for me. Once, after everyone left, I found a mop leaning against the wall, an old cotton one. Damp. Smelled faintly of smoke. You'd think I'd panic, but I didn't. I just stared at it, heart pounding, and whispered, "You can finish, Bill." Then I turned off the lights and left. I used to think what I saw that night was something supernatural, but over the years, I've come to see it differently. Maybe it wasn't a haunting, maybe it was a man who never got to finish his shift, who kept showing up because no one told him he could stop. There's something tragic about that, about being so devoted to your work that death doesn't even clock you out. And you know what's stranger? A few months ago, a friend from the mill called me, said they'd reopened the east wing after decades, new tiles, fresh paint. But when the morning crew came in, the floors were already mopped. The supervisors blamed a mix-up with the cleaning schedule. I didn't tell them anything. I just listened, nodded, and hung up. Because some things, you don't explain, you just live with them. And sometimes, when the world's quiet enough, I swear I can still hear the rhythmic squeak of a mop handle moving back and forth in the dark, steady, patient, like someone finishing what they started. Story number 10. It started like any other shift, just me, the plow, and the endless hum of the engine echoing through the cab. I'd been assigned Route 46, the northern stretch toward Kwalsund, a route I knew so well I could have driven it blindfolded. It was past midnight, and Tromsø was wrapped in one of those snowfalls that blur the edges of everything. The kind where the world feels muffled, like sound itself is afraid to move. I remember thinking I'd be done by 3 if the storm kept steady. I just didn't know that by dawn, half of what I thought I knew about that road would be gone. I first noticed something strange around the turn near the old forestry line. The snowplow's lights caught movement up ahead, something small, shifting between the trees. I slowed, thinking it might be a reindeer, but when I got closer, I saw it wasn't an animal, it was a child. Maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing barefoot in the snow, wearing what looked like a light blue coat. He was waving both arms over his head, like someone desperate for help. I slammed the brakes, the plow grinding to a stop, the sound scraping through the silence. The kid didn't move. I rolled down the window and yelled, "Hey, are you okay?" Nothing, just the wind brushing through the pines. I threw the truck in park and stepped out. My boots sank deep into the snow as I called again. "Hey, it's freezing out here. Where are your parents?" Still nothing. The boy just stared at me. His face was pale, and his lips had that bluish tint people get when they've been out too long. My first thought was that he'd wandered from one of the houses near Breivikaide, maybe got lost. But something about him made me hesitate. His clothes didn't make sense. That coat looked old. Like something from a thrift shop decades back. When I was about 10 meters away, he turned and ran, not toward the forest line, but right up the middle of the road ahead. I shouted for him to stop, but he was fast. Too fast for the snow depth. I climbed back into the plow, radioed dispatch. "This is Jonas, North Route. I think I've got a kid out here on the road. Maybe lost, possibly hypothermic." The response crackled back after a pause. "Copy, Jonas. Any visual landmarks?" I glanced at the GPS monitor. The coordinates were jumping slightly, struggling to hold a signal. "Near the forestry line, kilometer post 12, I said. Then I hit the high beams and started forward again slowly. The boy was still visible up ahead, darting between the edges of the road like he couldn't decide where to go. The weird thing was, his footprints didn't match his movement. I know that sounds impossible, but the plow light showed clear ground where he'd just run, smooth snow with no impressions. My heart started pounding. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel tighter, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was the snow blowing over too quickly. Maybe I was overtired. I told myself that, again and again. But when I reached the bend, he vanished, just gone. I stopped again, leaving the plow idling. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against my ears. Then, faintly, I heard crying. It wasn't far, just off the right side, down near the tree line. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out, crunching through the snow until I reached the ditch. "Hey, I'm here to help," I called. The crying stopped instantly. The beam of my light swung across branches, snow, and a patch of old wire fencing, then landed on something that made my stomach twist. There was a small boot half buried in the drift. Next to it, a broken wooden sled. Both looked like they'd been there a long time, weathered and discolored. I bent down to touch the sled, brushing the snow off the surface, and my fingers hit ice underneath. That's when the crying started again, softer, this time right behind me. I turned around so fast I slipped. No one was there, just my own boot prints and the distant hum of the plow. I don't think I've ever felt cold like that in my chest before, not from the weather, but from fear itself. I backed away, climbed into the truck, and slammed the door. My breathing was so loud it fogged the glass. I told myself I'd report it, mark the spot, come back with local search teams when the storm eased. I finished the shift around 3:30 and parked the plow at the depot. Dispatch asked if I was okay when I handed in my log. I told them I'd seen a kid near kilometer 12 and that there might be some debris worth checking. They promised to send someone up in daylight. I went home, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about the crying. Around 9 in the morning, I called the foreman to ask if they'd found anything. He sounded puzzled. "Jonas, there's no kilometer 12 on Route 46, he said. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. "What are you talking about? It's between 11 and 13. He paused, then said, "The last post on that route is 10. After that, it merges into Route 47 near the valley." "You've been on that road for years. You sure you didn't take a wrong turn?" I grabbed my keys and drove back out there. I know those roads better than my own neighborhood. But when I reached the forestry line, the road looked different. The asphalt just ended. There was no continuation, no turnoff, no bend. Beyond it was dense forest, untouched snow, no tire marks. I got out and walked forward, trying to find the split I'd cleared last night. Nothing. My GPS wouldn't even load a signal in that spot, it just flickered gray. I told my supervisor what I saw, and he thought maybe I'd drifted onto an old access path that wasn't on the new system. But I knew that wasn't it. Later that day, I reviewed the dashcam footage, expecting to see the boy. Instead, the video froze at 1:12 a.m. for a full minute, then resumed, but everything beyond that point was wrong. The road looked narrower, and the plow's lights only reached a wall of trees where the open road should have been. The timestamp kept running, though, so I knew the recording didn't stop. Then, near the end, I caught something in the trees. 2 faint shapes, low to the ground, like someone kneeling. And then, Clear as day, a child standing behind the plow, staring straight at the rear camera. I turned off the monitor and just sat there. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't tell anyone else. Not then. But the next night, when I reported for shift, the foreman asked me to run a different route, said a snowplow had gone missing overnight on the Kvalsund road. They thought maybe it slid into a ditch. My gut twisted. "Whose plow?" I asked. He looked down at his clipboard. "Unit 7, that's the one you had last night." I froze. "What do you mean, missing?" he sighed. "No sign of it. GPS shows it went offline near the forest boundary around 1 in the morning. Exactly where I'd been. I insisted on going with the search crew. We combed the area for hours, but there were no tracks, no plow, nothing. It was as if it had driven straight into the woods and disappeared. The only thing they found was an old metal badge wedged under a log, a city maintenance tag from 1979, labeled Jonas Running. That was my name. My exact name. I remember standing there, the cold biting into my fingers, staring at that badge like it was a joke I didn't understand. I wasn't born until 1983. The search leader said it was probably a coincidence, someone with the same name, maybe a relative. But my family's from Oslo. No one named Jonas Running ever worked municipal up here. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the boy, about the footprints that never sank, about how his coat looked decades old. I started digging through the town archives, just to prove to myself there had to be a rational explanation. It took me days, but I found something buried. In an old municipal record, from 1979, a snowplow from the Tromsø Maintenance Department vanished during a blizzard on the same northern route. The driver's name was Jonas Running. He was last heard calling dispatch about a child on the road near the forestry line. No wreckage was ever recovered. My stomach dropped reading that. I tried telling my coworkers, but they thought I'd gone sleep-deprived or misread something. I even went to the police, but they brushed it off. "Old records get mixed up," one officer said. Names repeat. Maybe he was right, but one thing never stopped bothering me: the dashcam video. A week later, I brought the footage to a friend at the depot who knew a bit about digital restoration. He enhanced the dark sections and slowed the frames near the end. That's when we saw it clearly, the boy's face. Not just a blur, not some optical trick. His eyes were glassy, lifeless, and his coat had a torn patch shaped like a snowflake. In the reflection of the plow's mirror behind him was me. Only it wasn't the me sitting in the driver's seat. It was another me, standing in the road, staring blankly toward the forest. I left the room without saying a word. For the next few days, I refused night shifts. I told them I was sick. But I couldn't stay away forever. Work is work. When I finally went back, they assigned me to a city route, closer to the docks. Safer, more populated. But every night, around 1 a.m., I'd check my side mirrors out of habit. And sometimes, just for a second, I'd see the outline of a child by the roadside, waving both arms. One night in March, as I pulled into the depot to end my route, one of the younger drivers came running up to me. "Jonas, you left your radio on Channel B again," he said. I frowned. "I never use Channel B," he shrugged. "Someone's been calling your name on it. Keeps saying, 'Come back.'" My chest went tight. I grabbed the radio, switched to B. The static hissed. Softly for a few seconds, then cleared. And then I heard it faint, small, the same voice from that night. "It's cold. Come back, please." I dropped the radio. I didn't go back on Route 46 after that. I couldn't. But 3 months later, another driver, a woman named Elise, took the northern run during a late snowfall. The next morning, her truck was found abandoned near the forestry line. No footprints, no tracks, just an open driver's door and the plow idling until it ran out of fuel. The dash cam was still recording. When they reviewed it, the footage ended at exactly 1:12 a.m., same as mine. They never told her family about the other videos. They just closed the section of road permanently, citing geological instability. But that's not why. Everyone in the depot knows better. We call it the dead stretch now. And when storms roll in from the north, I still hear that voice in the static, whispering through frequencies that shouldn't exist, asking me to come back. Sometimes I think about the boy, about whether he was ever real or if he was something else, something caught between two moments in time. I've replayed that night 1,000 times, trying to find where it started to go wrong. Maybe when I stopped the truck, maybe when I looked away. But one thing I know for sure, whatever's buried under that road isn't gone. It's just waiting for someone new to find it, and God help whoever does. Story number 11. I was halfway through my shift when I noticed something off with the restroom logs. I'd been working nights at that rest stop outside Oaxaca for almost 3 years, and nothing much ever happened after midnight. Truckers came and went, a few late buses stopped for bathroom breaks, and sometimes drunk drivers wandered in for water or to throw up. But that night it was around 2:10 a.m. I remember glancing at the clipboard outside the men's restroom and frowning. Every stall had a log sheet taped inside the door, where drivers were supposed to sign in before cleaning or inspection, just to keep track of hygiene checks. Normally, I'd see scattered signatures, different times, different names. But this time, 5 stalls, 5 identical signatures. J. Rivas, all written within the same minute, 2:07 a.m. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe some bored trucker had decided to mess around while taking a break. But I knew the name. I'd seen it. Earlier that night, on a receipt left at the coffee stand around midnight, a local delivery driver, I guessed lots of them passed through here. Still, it was weird enough that I decided to check the security monitor in the main cleaning room. The restroom cameras didn't show the stalls, obviously, but they covered the entrance hall, sinks, and doors. Around 2:07, one man walked in. Tall, maybe mid-40s, wearing a brown jacket. He carried something in his left hand, keys maybe. He went straight to the first stall on the right, never came out. No one else entered after him. I checked the feed twice, then 3 times. Same thing, no exit. I scrolled forward 20 minutes, 30, an hour. Nobody left that restroom. I even watched myself walk in at 2:10 to clean, saw the mop in my hand, saw me glance toward the stalls, but there was no sign of him. I froze right there in the tiny monitor room, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights. The air felt too still, like even the crickets outside had stopped. Then, just to convince myself it was nothing, I went back into the restroom. Everything looked normal, too normal. The kind of clean, quiet that makes you second-guess sound itself. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered, mixed with something metallic I couldn't place. I checked the stalls one by one, knocking first, like I always did. The first stall empty, second empty, third nothing, fourth locked. I waited, listening, no movement. Maintenance, I called softly, but nothing. I pushed the door slightly. It was locked from the inside, latch firm. I crouched and looked under. I swear to you, there were no shoes. Just a dark, uneven shadow where feet should have been. I backed away fast, almost tripping over the mop bucket. I told myself maybe the latch was jammed, it happened before. I went to grab my keyring, which had a universal tool for unhooking the stall locks from outside. But before I could use it, I heard the sound of the latch slide open by itself. Just one clean metallic click, I stood frozen, eyes fixed on that door. Slowly, it creaked inward, nobody inside. The toilet lid was down, the log sheet hung neat, and on it, a fresh signature. J. Rivas, 211 A.M. I looked at my watch. It was 2:11 exactly. My hands started shaking so bad I almost dropped the pen I'd been holding. I ran back to the cleaning room and replayed the footage. Nothing. The man still hadn't left. The door hadn't even opened on camera. The feed was clean, uninterrupted. I checked the restroom again, this time dragging in the maintenance flashlight I kept for blackouts. The light beam shook in my hand. I scanned the walls, the mirror, the floor under each stall. Then I noticed something faint: shoe prints leading from the entrance toward the last stall. But they didn't go all the way. They just stopped halfway across the tiles, as if the person had vanished mid-step. My first thought was, maybe someone had broken into the ceiling duct, but the vents were too narrow, bolted tight. There was nowhere to go. I decided to radio my coworker, Luis, who was out sweeping near the parking area. He joked at first, said I'd finally cracked after too many graveyard shifts. I told him to come see for himself. When he walked in, I showed him the logs. 5 signatures at 2:07, a 6th at 2:11, all the same handwriting. Luis squinted. Probably a prank, he said, someone looping around fast. But I pointed to the timestamp. 1 man, 1 entry, no exits. Luis's smile faded slowly, like he wanted to keep joking but couldn't find the words. We went back to the restroom together. Nothing. No footprints now, they were gone, as if wiped clean. Luis checked under the sinks, behind the trash bins, even opened the utility closet. Then he said quietly, "Let's check the outside camera." We went to the exterior feed, showing the walkway behind the rest stop, where the septic maintenance door was located. At 2:12, a few seconds after that last log entry, the security feed glitched static for about 2 seconds. When it cleared, the service door stood wide open. I looked at Luis. "You locked it?" I asked. He nodded. At the start of the shift, we went out there, flashlights cutting through the dark. The smell hit first: sour, chemical, the kind that makes your throat tighten. The concrete was damp, and the drain hatch cover was slightly lifted. Luis bent down, trying to move it aside. He managed to push it open enough to see the tunnel below. Black water. The reflection shimmered faintly with light from our flashlights. Then Luis muttered, "Something's written." I knelt beside him. On the inside of the metal hatch, scrawled in thick, wet letters, was the same name, J. Rivas. But it wasn't ink or marker. It looked like oil mixed with blood, still fresh. Luis swore under his breath and backed off, saying, "We should call the supervisor." I didn't disagree, but I wanted proof. First, something to show it wasn't just paranoia. I aimed my flashlight down the tunnel. There were drag marks leading deeper into the dark. Not footprints, more like something heavy being pulled. The tunnel connected to the old septic filtration line, unused since before I started. The system had been sealed years ago. We both knew that. Yet those marks were fresh. Our supervisor, Mateo, arrived 20 minutes later. By then, we'd locked the restroom, shut off the lights, and waited outside near the vending machines. I told him everything. He didn't believe a word until he saw the logs. Then his face changed pale, unreadable. "That name," he said quietly. "You sure you saw it?" I nodded. We both did. Mateo didn't say anything for a while, just stared at the sheet. Finally, he sighed and said, "That driver, he used to work here. Maintenance, long before you." Luis frowned. "Used to?" Mateo hesitated. "He disappeared. After a septic accident about 8 years ago. Fell in during a repair job. They never recovered the body. I didn't sleep after that. couldn't. My mind kept circling back to the footage, to the man who never left, to that signature appearing after I'd already checked the stall. Mateo told us to finish the shift like nothing happened, said he'd file a report in the morning. But around 4 a.m., when I went back to double-check the locked restroom, the door was ajar again. The smell was stronger now, like wet concrete and rust. I opened it cautiously, holding the flashlight low. The floor was streaked with water, and on every stall door, written neatly where the log sheets hung, was my own name. Repeated over and over in blue ink. Carlos Vega, 4:02 a.m. Even the handwriting matched mine. My knees gave out. I dropped the flashlight. The sound echoed like a slap. Luis came running when he heard me yell. He stopped dead when he saw the doors. "Man, this isn't funny," he whispered. I told him I didn't do it. I showed him my pen. It was dry, capped, untouched. We took photos with his phone. But when we looked at them minutes later, the writing didn't show. Just blank, clean doors. Every picture, every video, gone. Mateo called us both into his office before dawn, told us not to tell anyone. He said corporate would handle it quietly. "You both take tomorrow off," he said. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the tunnel, about those drag marks, around 1 a.m. I drove back, parked near the trucks, and slipped behind the building. The service hatch was closed this time, padlocked. Still, the concrete around it looked wet, like something had been moving underneath. I crouched and put my ear close, faint scraping, rhythmic, like someone dragging metal against stone. Then, faintly, I heard a voice. My name, just my name, whispered in that same calm tone Luis used when we worked side by side. Except it wasn't Luis's voice. It was mine. I jumped back and ran to my car. The next morning, I tried to tell Luis what I'd heard. He didn't show up for work. Mateo said he called in sick. The following day, he didn't answer his phone. His truck was still parked behind the rest stop, keys on the seat, doors unlocked. The police came later that week. They drained part of the septic line after a maintenance report flagged a blockage. Inside, they found a set of keys, a phone, and a uniform badge, Luis's. The name tag was smeared, but faintly visible under the grime. And beneath it, scratched into the metal surface of the badge, someone had carved the words, "Still here." They ruled it as an accident, said Luis, must have fallen during an inspection. But no one explained why the security footage cut out between 2 and 2:15 that night, or why my name reappeared on the restroom logs again, exactly 1 week later, at 2:07 a.m. The same minute as all the others. Mateo showed me the paper, himself before the police took it. Same handwriting, same ink, only one difference. Under my name, a new note had been added. 2 words, small but perfect. Next shift. I quit the next day. Left the keys on Mateo's desk and didn't even collect my last paycheck. The smell from that tunnel followed me home, though the mix of bleach and rot, like something trying to climb back up through the drains. For weeks, I'd hear dripping sounds in my apartment bathroom at the exact same time I used to clock in. Always 2:07. Always that same slow rhythm. Then, one morning, I found a folded piece of paper under my doormat. Rest stop stationery. The header still faintly stained with disinfectant marks. Inside, there was a single line, inspection log completed. C. Vega. I moved cities after that, changed numbers, changed jobs. I don't tell this story often because people always think I'm making it up, or confusing memories after too many graveyard shifts. But every time I stop for gas at night, I still check the restroom logs, even out of habit. And sometimes, in small towns, far from Oaxaca, I still see that name written near the top of the page. J. Rivas. different handwriting, different pen, same letters. And once, just once, I saw mine right beneath it. Same date, same minute, 27 a.m. Story number 12. I was midway through labeling tissue samples when I heard the faint click of a freezer door closing behind me. It was around 2:40 a.m., and I was the only technician on duty that night. The pathology unit in Bloemfontein General was quiet, eerily so, the kind of silence that hums in your ears until you start thinking you're hearing things. I turned, expecting to see the automatic latch hadn't caught properly, but the door was sealed tight. Inside that freezer were dozens of stored specimens, blood, bone, and organ slices, all tagged with unique barcodes for research. Still, that sound didn't feel mechanical. It felt deliberate, like someone had opened it softly and shut it with care. I shrugged it off at first. Night shifts play tricks on your mind, especially when you've been running tests since dusk, with only the buzz of fluorescent lights for company. But when I opened the logbook to record my current task, something didn't sit right. The specimen and count didn't match the physical slots. Tray 14B was marked vacant, but when I slid it out earlier, I'd seen a container labeled D1471 renal segment. That code wasn't in our system at all. I flipped through the last few pages of the logbook, and my stomach tightened. Whoever logged samples from the last shift had perfect handwriting, except one entry smudged like it was rushed. D1471. Same number, no initials beside it. I decided to check the freezer again. It hissed when I opened it, a rush of cold air hitting my face like an accusation. I scanned the trays, one by one, until I found 14B again. The renal segment was gone. My first thought was that I'd mixed up shelves earlier. But as I scanned along the stainless steel racks, I noticed something odd. Another container, D1471, sitting now in 14D, one shelf lower. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe someone from the day shift had rearranged the samples, though no one mentioned it during handover. Still, it wasn't my place to question everything. I had hours left on my shift and dozens of samples to process. By 3:15, I was halfway through a protein assay when I caught another noise, the slow, rubbery squeak of the freezer seal breaking. I froze mid-pipette. The sound came from directly behind me. I turned so fast, I almost knocked over the beaker. The freezer door was ajar, open just an inch, white vapor curling out. I stared at it, my pulse thudding in my ears. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling more than I'd like to admit. No answer. I stepped closer, every nerve in my body aware of how quiet the room had become. I gripped the door handle and pulled it fully open. Rows of containers gleamed under the light, all in their places except for one that had slid halfway out, resting crooked on its tray. D1471 again. I wanted to rationalize it, temperature changes, air pressure, mechanical fault, but something about the way it sat there, like it was, waiting to be noticed, made my stomach twist. I checked the label again, this time holding it closer to the light. The barcode had been manually scratched off and replaced with a handwritten sticker, a faint W, V, marked in blue ink. Those initials weren't from any staff member I knew. The next morning, when my supervisor, Dr. Venter, arrived, I tried to mention it casually. There was a mislabeled sample in freezer 2, code D1471. "It doesn't appear in the log system," I said. He looked up from his coffee with a kind of stillness that made me instantly uneasy. "Probably a backlog entry," he said, too quickly. "I'll handle it, don't worry about that one." Then he smiled, a polite, rehearsed smile that didn't reach his eyes, and changed the subject. For the next few nights, I couldn't stop thinking about that freezer. Curiosity can be dangerous when mixed with exhaustion. By the third night, I decided to quietly recheck the storage logs. Every entry was consistent, except now, D-1471 had been properly added, listed under Dr. Venter's clearance. Time-stamped 11:03 a.m., hours after I had reported it to him. The sample's content was noted as renal tissue discard batch. That made no sense. Discard batches are destroyed, not stored. Someone had altered the record. I tried to let it go. But something didn't let me. Around 2:50 a.m. that same night, I was logging enzyme readings when the power flickered. It was brief, just a second-long outage, but enough to reset the temperature alarms. The freezer's digital panel blinked red for a moment before stabilizing. I went over to ensure nothing had thawed. That's when I saw a new tray one I hadn't seen before inserted in the lower compartment. Its label read D-1472. My heart dropped. This one was heavier, wrapped in double containment. Inside, the outer casing was a smaller biohazard container with a blood-stained tag. I shouldn't have opened it, but my curiosity overruled my fear. I cracked the seal just enough to peek inside. Floating in the preservation fluid was something I instantly recognized: a human kidney. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping. My breath hitched as I resealed the lid and shoved it back into the rack. I felt sick, physically sick, thinking about the fact that someone had stored a fresh organ without authorization. I went straight to the staff terminal to check the intake log. No mention. No D-1472 anywhere in the record. That's when I noticed the last recorded update 2:44 a.m., time-stamped under supervisor override. That was 6 minutes before I'd opened the freezer. I called out again, louder this time. "Is anyone here?" My voice bounced off the tiled walls. The corridor beyond the pathology lab stretched empty under flickering lights. I felt watched, though logic told me no one else was scheduled. I walked down to the storage office and pushed the door open. Empty. But on the desk lay a clipboard. Dr. Venter's handwriting, neat as always. The top sheet listed 3 codes: D-1470, D-1471, D-1472. Next to them, collected, confirmed, shipped. My heart pounded. Shipped? To where? I scanned further down and saw a courier company name. No one we'd ever used officially. Then, at the bottom, initials, WV. It hit me, his own initials. I felt my stomach drop. He wasn't logging samples for research. He was trafficking them. That's why he brushed me off so quickly. That's why the records kept changing after hours. I should have left it alone, but something inside me needed proof. I pulled out my phone and began taking photos of the clipboard, the freezer labels, everything. That's when the motion sensor lights flicked on in the hallway outside. Someone was walking toward the lab. I turned off my phone screen and ducked behind the storage counter, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it could be heard. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I held my breath. The handle turned slowly, then clicked. The door creaked open an inch. Dr. Venter stepped inside, wearing his lab coat over plain clothes. His face looked calm, but his eyes scanned the room with precision. "Is someone here?" he asked, his tone mild but probing. I stayed perfectly still. He walked closer, stopping right beside the freezer. I heard the beep of the keypad as he punched in his override code. The door opened, releasing that familiar wave of cold air. He lifted out one of the unlogged containers D-1472 and set it on the counter. Then, quietly, he pulled out a second empty container and began transferring the organ between them with surgical care. That's when my phone buzzed. A notification, low battery. The tiny vibration against the metal shelf betrayed me. His head snapped up. I froze. He didn't speak at first. He just turned in the direction of the sound, scanning, calculating. "Who's there?" he said finally, sharper now. I stayed, crouched, praying he'd leave. But instead, he walked around the counter, slow, deliberate steps. I could see his shoes, polished black leather, stopping inches from my hiding place. "Come out," he said softly. "You shouldn't be here." I stood, my hands trembling, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What are you doing with those samples, doctor?" I demanded, my voice cracking. His expression didn't change much, just a faint sigh, as if this were inevitable. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said. "This project funds half the hospital's research. These are donations." He emphasized the last word like it would make it sound moral. I shook my head. "You're lying. None of those samples are registered. You're selling organs." He gave a tired smile, like I was a child who didn't understand the world. "You think medicine survives on grants and goodwill? Wake up, girl. People die waiting for transplants while bureaucrats file paperwork. I expedite the process, that's all." My throat went dry. "Those people didn't consent," I whispered. "You're stealing from the dead." His eyes flickered then, the first hint of something cold and furious. "They're dead," he said simply. "They don't need them anymore." I wanted to run, but his body was blocking the only exit. I glanced at the security camera above the door, dark, no red light, disabled. He noticed my gaze and smiled again. "No one's watching," he said. "Put the phone down, and I'll forget you saw this." Instead, I pressed the emergency alarm button on the wall. A shrill, piercing siren filled the lab. Venter lunged forward, trying to grab me, but I bolted past him, nearly slipping on the tiles. I ran down the corridor, my heart slamming against my ribs. Behind me, I heard his shoes striking the floor, fast, angry, closing the distance. I turned a corner into the autopsy wing and ducked into a storage closet, locking it from the inside. My breath came in shallow gasps. I could hear him outside, muttering, then the sound of the main door slamming. Silence. I stayed hidden until I heard security responding to the alarm. When I finally stepped out, 2 guards and a night supervisor were already in the corridor. I pointed them toward the pathology unit. "He's in there. Dr. Venter checked the freezer," I stammered. They rushed in, but when they returned minutes later, their expressions told me everything. The lab was spotless. No unlogged samples, no clipboard, no sign of him. The police came later that morning. They interviewed me for hours, treating my story like a nervous breakdown from exhaustion. I showed them the photos I took, but every image came out corrupted, blurred white screens, unreadable. They searched his office, found nothing illegal, and suspended the investigation within weeks. Officially, he resigned and moved abroad. Unofficially, I knew he was still out there, working under a new name. A month later, a package arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a small cooler box. I opened it, terrified. Nestled in ice was a sample jar labeled D1471. Inside floated a piece of tissue, human, unmistakably. And beneath it, a note in his handwriting. "Keep this one safe. It belongs to you." I quit the hospital the next day. I couldn't step near a lab again. But sometimes, late at night, when the refrigerator hums or a door clicks shut, I feel that same rush of cold air across my skin, and I swear I can smell preservative chemicals. It's not ghosts that haunt me. It's the knowledge that he's still collecting, somewhere, while I sleep, and that one day, one of those unlogged samples might bear my name again. Story number 13. I'd worked the night shift at Nishikatsura Station for almost a year, before anything strange ever happened. You get used to the quiet out there. After the 10:40 train to Otsuki, nothing moves but the wind and the vending machine humming against the wall. That night, though late November, cold enough that my breath felt heavy in the air, I saw someone step off the 11:7 train. There isn't an 11:7 train. I know the schedule by heart. Every shift, I double-check it out of habit. The platform display was blank. The signal lights didn't change. Still, the train slid past, doors hissed open, and a single man in a dark coat stepped out like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. At first, I thought maybe I'd lost track of time, or maybe there was an unscheduled inspection run. I waited for him to come toward the exit gate, but he didn't. He just stood on the platform, back to me, not moving. I called out, "Sumimasen? The next train isn't due until morning." No answer. The sound of the engine faded, and the air filled with that deep mountain silence that swallows everything. When I blinked, he was gone. Not walked off, gone. I ran out onto the platform, thinking maybe he'd slipped past me or jumped down onto the tracks. But there was no sign, no footprints in the frost, no closing door sound, no shadow beyond the curve. Just me, the cold, and the ticking in my chest that didn't feel like my own heartbeat. I tried to tell myself I imagined it. Long hours do that to people. My supervisor, Endo-san, always warned me about fatigue. "It's not ghosts, Kaori," he'd say, "it's blood sugar." I laughed about it in the break room the next morning, said I saw a man step off a ghost train. He laughed too, but I could see he didn't find it funny. That line runs automatic after 10. "Nothing stops there," he said, tapping the schedule pinned to the corkboard. "If you see it again, note the time, maybe a maintenance car." I nodded, but deep down, I knew what I saw wasn't maintenance. The man looked too deliberate, like he had a destination. The following night, I watched the platform every minute after 10:30. My hands kept clenching and unclenching around my radio. And then, at 11:07, right on the second, the rails trembled. The lights blinked once. The same train, same shape, same rhythm, slid into the station. And there he was again. Same dark coat, same posture. I swear I could hear the faint squeak of his shoes on the platform, even though I was watching from inside. I pressed the mic. "Control, this is Nishikatsura Station. Platform intrusion. Time 23:07. Static. No response." The station phone line clicked dead, which happens sometimes in the valley, but it didn't feel like a coincidence. When I looked back, the man was facing me now, though I couldn't see his face clearly through the glass. His head tilted, slow, like he was listening for something. Then he turned, stepped backward toward the edge, and the train doors closed. When they opened again, he was gone. I didn't sleep that morning. I lay on my futon and kept replaying the moment he turned his head. That slow tilt, it reminded me of someone, my brother, Kenta. He used to do that when teasing me, acting like he couldn't hear what I said. He'd been gone exactly 1 year that week. They called it an accident, though no one ever found the car that supposedly went off the mountain road. I got this job to stay busy, to keep from thinking too much. But when I checked the clock, the time of the 11:07 apparition matched the time listed on his missing person report, 23:07. My chest felt hollow when I realized that. I told myself I'd get proof. On the third night, I brought my old film camera, the kind Kenta and I used to share. The film roll clicked into place just as the minute hand crossed the hour. I stood near the window with the camera ready. The sound came first, steel wheels. Grinding, though there were no signal lights. My breath fogged the glass. The train arrived silently, and again, the man stepped off. I snapped a photo. The shutter echoed loud in the empty station. The man's head jerked slightly, as if he'd heard it. He turned, and this time his face caught the fluorescent light. My knees nearly gave out. It was Kenta's face, pale, thinner than I remembered, but unmistakable. His eyes were unfocused, like he was looking through me, not at me. I shouted his name, "Kenta, it's me." But my voice sounded swallowed, like the air itself refused to carry it. The next second, he was gone. When I developed the film the next morning, the photo was blank, overexposed. Every frame before and after looked normal. The station clock, the rails, the vending machine, but not that one. Just white light. I almost quit after that. I typed up my resignation letter, left it on Endo-san's desk, but when I came back for my next shift, he was there waiting. "You're not leaving," he said, almost pleading. "You should know something first." He closed the door to his office. "A year ago, your brother's car wasn't found because it wasn't on the road. It derailed on the freight track near the South Tunnel." He hesitated, staring at the floor. "The report was sealed because it involved company negligence." My throat closed. "Why didn't you tell me?" he sighed. "We thought it would make it easier." He was carrying maintenance tools for this line. "That's why I think—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Maybe you shouldn't work alone anymore." That night, I didn't want to go in, but I had to see it again to understand. I sat in the control booth, with the security feed on loop. At exactly 11:07, static flickered across the screen. The external cameras went black. Only the platform feed stayed on, dim but visible. The same man stepped out. I didn't move this time. I just whispered, "Kenta, if that's you, please stop." He turned, very slowly, and lifted his hand. His palm was pressed flat against the glass wall separating us. I could see the veins, the scars from the old burn he got fixing our father's stove. My tears blurred the image, but I didn't look away. Then his lips moved. No sound came through, but I could read them clearly. "Go to the tunnel." Every instinct screamed no, but I had to know. I took my flashlight, radio, and walked down the empty track. The wind had died. My boots scraped against the gravel like whispers. The South Tunnel's mouth gaped ahead, half covered in rusted metal sheeting. A sign read, "Maintenance access restricted." My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside. The air turned colder. Halfway through, I saw it an old maintenance cart derailed against the wall, metal twisted, half buried under debris. A faded uniform jacket lay beside it. The name patch was almost gone, but the first letter K was still visible. I knelt, fingers trembling as I brushed off the dirt. There was something metallic underneath. A small badge, corroded but still legible. Rail Inspection Crew, K. Tanaka. My brother's ID. I radioed for help, but the line buzzed and died. I turned to leave, and the flashlight dimmed again. The beam caught something on the wall, handprints, smeared dark and dry, leading deeper. I followed them until the tunnel curved and opened into a small maintenance bay. There, I found a second track, half submerged. The water shimmered faintly under the dying light. Then, behind me, I heard the sound of an approaching train, not from the open end of the tunnel, but behind the wall. The vibration traveled through the ground, up my legs. My flashlight went out completely. I stood frozen, listening to that iron rhythm pass inches from where I stood, though no track connected to it. Then, silence. I turned and ran, gasping until the tunnel's cold air gave way to night again. Back at the Dodd station, the monitors were still alive. The platform feed showed the 11:07 train again. The man stood there, coat unbuttoned, face clear now. My brother. Only this time, he smiled sad, but peaceful. He mouthed, "Thank you." Then, as the train pulled away, the feed flickered, and when it cleared, the platform was empty. The time read 11:10. For the first time in months, I felt the weight in my chest lift. In the days that followed, investigators came to confirm the discovery. They recovered what was left of the cart and the tools. DNA confirmed it was him. The company quietly released a statement about an unresolved maintenance incident, but I knew it was more than that. That night, when I told Endo-san, he just nodded and said, "Some debts don't settle until they're witnessed." I kept working there for another 2 weeks, maybe out of habit, maybe because I needed to prove to myself that whatever had happened was real. Each night, I waited. No train came, no phantom lights, no vibration in the rails. Just the ordinary silence of the mountain station, the kind that used to comfort me before all this. On my final night, I walked the platform one last time, tracing the yellow line with my foot. I looked down the tracks and whispered, "Goodbye, Kenta." And maybe it was the wind, or maybe not, but I thought I heard a faint clang, like a single note from a distant bell echoing back. I didn't take any souvenirs from that job. I left the uniform, the keys, everything, but I did keep one thing, the photo that came out blank. When I hold it to the light, I swear I can still see a faint outline, like someone half stepping off a train. It's strange though. Every year, on the same date, the corner of that photo curls slightly, as if it's been warmed. I don't show it to anyone. People wouldn't believe me anyway, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I'm waiting alone for a late connection somewhere, and the station speakers crackle for no reason, I find myself glancing at the clock, just to be sure it isn't 11:07. Story number 14. I was halfway through stirring a pot of curry when the kitchen clock clicked past midnight, and the order printer came to life again. That was the 5th ticket in under an hour, all for the same thing, chicken and rice, no onions, labeled for crew D block. I remember frowning, wiping my hands on my apron, and calling out to the line cook, "Didn't we already send food up there?" He shrugged, too tired to care. "If the system prints it, we make it," he said, tossing another ladle of stew into a tray. That was the rule here. At the Kalgoorlie mining compound, no questions, no deviations. Orders came through from the internal terminal, and you served whoever was hungry enough to work through the night. But that night, I started noticing something wrong with the pattern. D Block hadn't been on the roster for weeks. It was a small team, mostly maintenance guys, who handled Shaft 4B before it collapsed last winter. I remembered their names because they used to come down to the cafeteria every night, 5 of them, all with loud laughs and muddy boots. Then the accident happened. There was a blast underground. The shaft caved in, and rescue efforts stretched for days. Only 2 bodies were ever found. The rest were presumed buried under tons of rock. After that, D Block was closed permanently. No shifts, no workers, nothing. And yet, here I was, serving meals to their ID numbers again. At first, I thought maybe the new site manager had reassigned the old ID codes to incoming workers. That's common enough in the mines. The system's old, built in the late 2000s, and every department runs on reused logins. Still, it unsettled me. I stacked the 5 trays on the counter, ready for pickup, and buzzed the transport desk on the intercom. "Food for D Block's ready," I said. The response crackled back. "Copy, truck on the way." When the small delivery buggy pulled up outside 15 minutes later, the driver didn't get out. I stepped into the loading dock, pushing the metal cart toward him. "D Block again?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He avoided eye contact. "Yeah," he muttered. "Been getting a few for them lately." I tried to joke. "They must be working overtime from the grave." He didn't laugh, just shifted the trays into the buggy and drove off into the darkness of the compound road. It would have ended there if not for what I noticed the next morning. When I came in for the handover, The return trays were sitting by the dish pit, untouched. Not empty, not half-eaten. Still sealed, plastic film tight, steam condensed inside. Each one marked, delivered, 1:24 a.m. That didn't make sense. Food logs required drivers to collect empty trays from every site before sign-off. If he dropped them off, why were they still full? The next night, another ticket printed around the same time. D-Block Crew X4. I hesitated before cooking. The kitchen was quiet, humming with the low sound of fridges. I could feel the prickle of nerves rising under my skin, like someone was watching from the hallway window. I told myself not to be dramatic, maybe the computer was glitching. I filled the trays anyway, double-checked the tags, and logged them as delivered. This time, I waited after calling it in. I wanted to see who picked them up. 15 minutes passed. No one came. I leaned against the counter, sipping instant coffee, eyes fixed on the security camera feed mounted near the exit door. At 12:46, the motion sensor blinked on. The loading dock door slid open just slightly enough for the temperature to dip inside. The sensor detected movement, but the camera image showed only the empty doorway. Then, as the feed flickered, I heard the sound trays being lifted from the counter. Not fast, not clattering, one by one. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. The printer clicked again. Another ticket. Same order, same block. My hands trembled as I tore it off. The timestamp read 12:47 a.m., exactly 1 minute after the first delivery disappeared. I forced myself to move toward the door, but when I opened it, the hallway outside was empty. The air smelled faintly of coal dust and disinfectant. I followed the corridor toward the service elevator, my sneakers squeaking on the tiles. The indicator light above the lift blinked down. Someone or something had taken it toward the lower levels. I didn't sleep that morning. I kept turning it over in my head. Maybe the mining database still auto-sent supply requests to the closed block. Maybe the buggy driver had picked them up early, before I saw him. But the footage, it showed the trays vanishing from the counter while I was still watching. I printed the still frame, showed it to my colleague, Jenna, during shift change. She frowned. "You sure this isn't just the camera lagging?" she said. "It's a cheap feed. Half the time it freezes when the door opens." She had a point. Still, she promised to check the delivery logs. When I returned that night, Jenna was waiting by the prep table, face pale. "You need to see this," she said, holding up a clipboard. She'd printed out all delivery receipts from the past week. Every D-Block order signed off with the same driver name, F. Harris. That name stopped me cold. Frank Harris was one of the miners who died in the shaft collapse. His photo had hung on the memorial wall just outside the cafeteria. I'd served him coffee almost every night. We brought the issue to the site manager, Mr. Latham, the next day. He was a stiff, heavy-set man who always smelled faintly of diesel. He waved us into his office with a tired sigh. "I know about the duplicate orders," he said before we even started. "Old data loop in the inventory system. Happens every few months. Just cancel the tickets manually." He wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. "And the driver? Signature?" Jenna asked. "Clerical error," he said too quickly. "Drop it." I didn't drop it. That night, I stayed after my shift ended. When the kitchen lights dimmed and the compound went quiet, I logged into the system terminal using my supervisor code. Every delivery request came with a routing ID, a GPS coordinate stamped from the delivery's destination scanner. I traced the last D-Block order from 12:46 a.m. The coordinate pointed directly to Shaft 4B, the sealed tunnel, the one where the 5 miners died. My hands were sweating on the keyboard. The shaft had been cemented shut months ago. No entry, no signal, nothing. Yet somehow, the orders were pinging from that exact location every night. I printed the coordinates, stuffed them into my pocket, and decided to see it myself. The compound was massive, but the road to the old shaft lay beyond the storage hangars. I borrowed the kitchen buggy and drove slowly through the dark lanes, headlights bouncing off rows of rusted machinery. The night air was still, thick with the smell of iron dust. I shouldn't have gone alone, I knew that. But curiosity pulled harder than fear. When I reached the barricade, the floodlights flickered faintly, powered by an old generator. Danger, unstable structure, the sign read. The gate was chained, but the padlock hung open, broken clean through. I stepped inside, flashlight in hand. The tunnel entrance was a yawning black cut into the rock, partially filled with rubble. My footsteps echoed softly as I walked closer. A thin trail of food containers led into the dark metallic trays, cracked open, curry dried on the edges. I counted 5 before the light hit something else, a metal badge lying in the dust. I picked it up. Harris, F. The plastic was scratched, but the barcode still visible. My throat went dry. Then I heard it faint, rhythmic clinking deeper inside, like cutlery tapping against metal. I called out, voice trembling. "Hello? Anyone there?" The sound stopped. Silence stretched for a few seconds, then a voice answered, distant, muffled male, but hollow, like filtered through water. We didn't finish our meal. I ran. I don't even remember turning around. One moment I was standing near the tunnel mouth. The next I was sprinting toward the buggy, heart punching my ribs. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. I tried to tell security, but by the time they followed me back, the gate was locked again, chain restored, no trace of any trays. The next morning, Mr. Latham called me into his office. His tone was icy calm. "You're not authorized to be near sealed structures," he said. "Consider this a warning." I told him what I saw. He leaned forward, jaw tightening. "You didn't see anything. Shaft 4B is closed. Always has been. Do you understand?" He paused before adding quietly, "If you value your job, you'll stop asking questions." I quit that week. But before leaving, I copied the system logs to a USB drive. The file contained hundreds of order entries, all addressed to the same 5 ID numbers, time-stamped nightly between 12:30 and 1 a.m. I showed it to a local journalist months later, but she called it digital ghost data, shrugged it off. The mining company shut down operations 2 months after that due to structural concerns. I thought that would be the end of it. Then, last winter, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a cafeteria ticket printed from the compound system. The timestamp was 12:46 a.m., the same minute I saw the trays vanish. The order read, chicken and rice, no onions. Crew D Block X1. Underneath, in pen, someone had written, "Thanks for remembering us, Lila." That's my name. I stared at that slip for hours, trying to convince myself it was a prank. Maybe someone from the compound was messing with me, using an old printer. But the paper, it smelled faintly of coal dust and curry, like the kitchen that night. I still have it tucked inside my desk drawer, though sometimes I wish I didn't, because every so often, maybe once a month, the house gets a delivery. I'll find a plastic tray left by the doorstep when I leave for work in the morning, always sealed, always labeled the same way. Last time, I opened it. Inside wasn't food. It was an ID badge smeared with red dirt, cracked in the corner. Lila Morgan Cafeteria. Mine. The one I lost the night I ran from the shaft. I keep it in a small box now, locked tight, but sometimes when the house is quiet after midnight, I swear I can hear that faint clinking again, metal against metal, somewhere deep below the floor. And every time I think about it, I remember Frank's voice from the tunnel, soft but certain, "We didn't finish our meal." I don't tell people about that part anymore. They'd think I'm losing it. Maybe I am, but I can still see those untouched trays lined up on the counter that night, steam pooling beneath the film, waiting for hands that never came through the door. I served food to the dead, and they never stopped coming back for seconds. Story number 15. I was halfway through my third cup of instant coffee when the red on-air light flicked back to life. It was 1:07 a.m., and I was already counting the hours until dawn. The night shift at Radio Surat FM was quiet most nights, just me, a flickering board of sliders, and a few loyal truck drivers calling in with song requests. The storm outside hadn't let up since evening. Sheets of rain kept rattling against the studio windows, and thunder occasionally drowned out the signal. I adjusted my headphones and leaned toward the mic. You're listening to RJ Neha on Radio Surat, keeping you company through the storm. Let's go to our next caller. My voice echoed back slightly in my headset, then the phone line clicked. At first, there was only static, thin, brittle noise mixed with faint gurgling, like water against glass. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I said, tapping the console. A pause. Then a man's voice, soft and slightly distorted. "Play Lag Ja. Gail, please." I blinked. The line dropped before I could reply. It wasn't unusual to get shy callers, but the name on my caller ID froze me mid-sentence. Arjun Patel. I knew that name. Every local station had been covering the same breaking story that afternoon. 36 dead in flash floods near the Tapi River. Among the names read out by authorities was an Arjun Patel, a 28-year-old from Athwa Lines. I remembered because his sister had called our newsroom crying. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a different Arjun, maybe someone using his name. I wrote it down on my pad anyway, under weird calls, a little joke list I kept to stay awake on dead nights. But 5 minutes later, the same number flashed again. The studio line lit up bright green, the kind of glow that instantly raises your pulse. I hesitated, then picked up. "Radio Surat, this is Neha." "Who's this?" There was a hum, low, electrical, and wet sounding, then that same voice again, quieter this time, almost pleading. "Please, play it." My mouth went dry. I leaned closer to the mic, whispering, "Is this a joke? Because this number." But before I could finish, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, the monitors blinked, and the air conditioning unit coughed out a puff of dust. The backup generator kicked in, humming from the basement below. I ended the segment early, cued an old Kishore Kumar track, and took off my headphones. The room felt smaller, almost like someone else was breathing in it with me. I called out to Ramesh, the night security guard, through the glass partition. "Did you hear that?" Power just, but he wasn't at his post. His chair was empty, spinning slightly from the draft under the door. I tried calling his walkie, no answer, just faint static. That's when I noticed something on my screen. The studio software that logged caller IDs was glitching. Every entry on the list, 15 calls in a row, showed the same number. Arjun Patel, 0 duration. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to be scared or angry. My rational side screamed that it was a technical fault, a prank. But something deeper, quieter whispered that it wasn't. The song finished playing. Silence returned, heavy and unnatural. I had to fill the air, so I pressed the mic button again, trying to keep my voice steady. "That one goes out to everyone braving the rain tonight. Remember, the floods have taken many lives. Stay safe, stay indoors." My voice cracked at the end, betraying the unease I felt. I ended the segment early and went off air to make tea. In the small break room, the kettle's hiss filled the silence. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Hello?" Nothing, just faint dripping sounds, like water leaking from a ceiling. then my own voice, whispering, "Stay in the studio." I dropped the phone so hard it cracked the tile. For a few seconds, I just stood there, breathing fast, staring at the handset where it lay buzzing on the floor. My voice. I knew what I'd heard. But how could it be? I hadn't recorded anything. I forced myself back into the control room. I needed light, sound, something normal. But when I looked at the call log again, the last entry had changed. The name Arjun Patel was gone. In its place, RJ Neha, connected. I swear I felt my heart stop for a second. The clock on the wall ticked louder than before, each second stretching too long. Then the studio phone rang again. The ringtone was different, slower, drawn out, like someone dragging a finger along a violin string. I let it ring, backing away toward the exit. On the fifth ring, the line cut itself. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, wet ones. You could hear the squelch of soaked shoes against linoleum, pacing slowly toward the studio door. "Ramesh?" I called, my voice barely audible. The steps stopped just outside the glass window, but the narrow hallway was empty. I could see it clearly under the flickering emergency light, no one there. I turned off the mic, grabbed my bag, and decided to leave early. But as I reached the exit, a faint melody floated through the speakers I'd just muted. Kishore Kumar again, Lag Ja Gale. The same song. I checked the playlist. It wasn't there. I froze. The audio deck showed the source as external input, channel 3, which connected to the backup generator room downstairs. That made no sense. Nothing from there could feed into the main console. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the flashlight and headed down the narrow staircase. The power lines hummed through the walls, and the smell of diesel hung heavy in the air. Each step felt slick with damp. By the time I reached the basement, my flashlight began to flicker. The sound of the song grew louder, not playing through speakers, but echoing faintly, like someone humming it near a wall. The generator room. The door was ajar. Water trickled from under it. I pushed it open and felt a gust of cold air rush past me. Inside, the backup generator thudded rhythmically, half submerged in a thin layer of murky water. My flashlight beam caught something glinting in the corner, an old smartphone lying face up in the puddle, screen cracked but still glowing faintly. The caller ID flashed over and over. Missed call, RJ Neha. My own number. I stumbled backwards so fast I nearly slipped. My heart was hammering so loud it drowned the generator's hum. I wanted to run, but my eyes locked on the phone. The display changed again. Now it was dialing out, calling Arjun Patel. I heard the distant click of a connected line, followed by gurgling static. Then, my own voice echoed from the tiny speaker. "Please, play it." That exact phrase, word for word. The phone buzzed violently, screen brightening, then shorted out with a pop that smelled like burnt plastic. The room went dark, except for my flashlight's trembling beam. That's when I saw the water level rising. Not rapidly, but steady, like something underneath was displacing it. I backed toward the stairs, but the door slammed shut behind me with a metallic clang. I slammed my shoulder against it, screaming for Ramesh, for anyone. No answer. Just the steady drip of water and the rhythmic cough of the generator. Then the humming started faint, human, and very close. "Lag Ja Gale," whispered just behind me. I turned the light. Nothing. Only ripples moving outward from the middle of the flooded floor. My knees nearly gave out. I forced myself to breathe, to think. This couldn't be real. It was exhaustion, stress, caffeine, something explainable. I repeated that in my head as I fumbled for my phone to call for help. No signal. The bars were gone. After what felt like an hour but was probably minutes, the generator sputtered off. Silence took over, thick and absolute. Then, through that silence, I heard my Name, Neha. Drawn out, careful, like someone savoring each letter. It came from the puddle. I aimed my flashlight straight down, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a face beneath the surface, eyes open, hair drifting, mouth moving. Then the light flickered again, and the reflection vanished. I screamed, hitting the door until it burst open at last. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time, nearly slipping, slamming the studio door behind me. I don't remember how long I sat in that chair afterward. Maybe an hour, maybe less. When the rain finally began to ease, I found the courage to call the morning staff. I told them there'd been flooding downstairs and I was shutting the station early. They didn't argue. By the time they arrived, the basement had dried up almost completely. No sign of water damage, no burnt phone, no trace of what I'd seen. They laughed it off as exhaustion and overwork. "You've been doing too many night shifts," my boss said. "Take 2 days off." I didn't argue. But that night, when I got home, my personal phone buzzed. 1 new voicemail, no number listed. I hesitated, then pressed play. Static. Then faintly, that same male voice. "Thank you for playing it." The message ended abruptly. I deleted it, switched off my phone, and sat in the dark until sunrise. A week later, I returned to work. I told myself I was ready, rational, over it. But when I entered the studio, something caught my eye on the desk, the office phone blinking with a single missed call. I picked it up, half dreading, half curious. The log showed 17A, Arjun Patel. My shift hadn't even started yet. I unplugged the phone, heart pounding, and told myself not to give it power. But around 1:10, the same ringtone began playing from somewhere behind the wall. It wasn't the studio line. It was coming from downstairs again. This time, I didn't go. I left the station key on the desk and walked out into the humid night air. I called my boss the next morning and told him I was done with radio forever. He didn't ask why. I think he knew something wasn't right down there. Because a month later, I read in the local news that the backup generator at Radio Surat had short-circuited during maintenance, flooding from a burst pipe. The technician who went down to fix it never came back up. They found his tools scattered, the lights off, and his phone submerged in the water near the generator. It was still buzzing when they recovered it, they said. The call log showed 3 missed calls from the same number mine. That's why I don't talk about it publicly, though people ask me why I quit so suddenly. Because no matter how much I try to reason it away, every time I hear Lag Ja Gale playing somewhere at a wedding, a tea stall, or on the radio, I feel that same chill crawl up my spine. I can still hear his voice through the static. "Please, play it." And sometimes, late at night, when my phone buzzes once, then stops, I don't check it. I just sit there in silence, pretending not to notice the faint smell of wet earth drifting through my window. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.